And Walker, Taipari for lateness, and Filipina for early departure. I'm happy to move those.
Second.
Seconded. Councillor Filipina. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Now, we've got any particular declarations of interest, members? Nothing that you need to discuss? No? Minutes, I'm happy to move.
Second.
Minutes, thank you. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. We've got no petitions, no public input. We've got local boards who will be coming in for the confidential, the SHA section. So we've got quite a long list. So let me talk first around the SHAs. We've got David Hollins from Howick, Julie Ferry from Puketapapa, and Brenda Steele and Phelan Perry from Rodney to talk to the SHAs. Joe Bergen will be here for the Devonport Takapuna item and for items 15 and 16, as will Kay McIntyre. And Simon Randall's here. Are you here for speaking or observing, Simon? Okay, cool. That's excellent. So we'll just note those. Extraordinary business, there's none. Notices of motion, none. So we move on to
Move 9.
item 9. Happy to move item number 9. I'll second that. All those in favour, please say
Aye.
aye. Yes, carried.
Ditto 10.
And number 10, just move. I'll second that. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. So just before we go on to item 11, the ProdCom item, just a bit of a discussion about today. We've got 2 or 3 reasonably meaty items. Obviously the SHA item. I'd like us to aim, hopefully, to work towards a break at about 12:30. We asked at the last meeting that we give a starting time for our councillors' meeting. We'll try and do about a quarter of an hour. If there are any items people wish to discuss at 12:45, we'll start that and then come back here just after 1, and hopefully we'll be ready to do SHAs then. There's a lot of SHAs to go through, and I don't think people want to be here till 6 tonight. I know quite a lot of people have got meetings at 5. Councillor Cooper and I need to be out west at just after 5, so I think we need to be just a bit focused on how we get through this. So on to item 11, which is the Productivity Commission's Better Urban Planning Issues paper. We've had work done on our feedback on this, which is essentially still an issues paper, unlike the one on the legislation, which is actually a submission. So, welcome.
Right, good morning. I'll just, can I grab the clicker there? So I'll just go through a bit of the background of this.
It's the guy next to you.
Can't turn it off.
Is that all right now? Okay, so the Better Urban Plan, I'll sit back and speak very loudly like that. How's that?
Maybe we might just turn them away from each other a little bit, might help. And yep, just try that so you can still speak into it. Who knows?
How's that?
Thank you.
All right. So this item is about Council's response to the Productivity Commission's issues paper, which is part of their inquiry on better urban planning. The Commission has been tasked with reviewing New Zealand's urban planning system, and they have been clear that they've taken a blue skies approach to this. The main purpose of the inquiry, as per the terms of reference, is to identify from first principles what the most appropriate planning system is for allocating land use to support desirable social, economic, environmental, and cultural outcomes. The scope of this inquiry is across the 3 key pieces of legislation. So that's the Resource Management Act, the Land Transport Management Act, and the Local Government Act. It also includes, however, elements of the Building Act, the Reserves Act, and the Conservation Act that relate to land use. The terms of reference also exclude a critique of previous and current reforms of urban planning systems and legislation. So hence they're taking a blue skies approach. In terms of the context, this builds on previous inquiries, so you're probably well across the using land for housing inquiry and the housing affordability inquiry. And in both of those, they've, well, at least in the housing affordability one, they first touched on a review of the key pieces of legislation, and then they again talked about it quite a bit in the final report of using land for housing. There's a lot of thinking going on in this space already. So LG&Z has released a blue skies discussion document looking at the resource management system. And the New Zealand Council for Infrastructure Development also, end of last year, put forward an urban planning reform proposal. And it's quite important to keep in mind that there's a significant amount of other parallel reform underway, and that includes the Resource Legislation Amendment Bill, which you'll be hearing about, I believe that's item 13. And that's part of the longer thread of resource management reforms. And on top of that, there's a national policy statement being developed on urban development, and that's by MB, so Ministry of Business Innovation and Employment, together with the Ministry for the Environment. So in terms of our response, our draft submission is reflecting both our feedback and that of Auckland Transports. We've worked closely with them to develop this response. And we've also worked closely with Watercare. So their submission does align with ours, and they support a number of key points that we make as well, including around the principles that we recommend. We support a principles-based approach. We think it's timely, and we prefer it to ad hoc reform, which we also touch on around the RL bill. And to do this, we focus on identifying some key elements that could be reflected and addressed in principles for them to think about. We also identify principles that are already existing, which may be useful. So things like ethic of stewardship and kaitiakitanga around the RMA, and value for money and operations around the LTMA. We've responded to their approach, and we've gone with a theme-based response, and we've pulled out three key themes. One is around urban planning as a system. The other is evidence-based. Sorry, the other is planning for future funding challenges, and the other is around informed decision-making for the public.
Wish they put more effort into the dairy thing.
We've also received 3 pieces of local board feedback. You've got the Kaipātikis, I believe, attached to your report. And what we've done is had a look at their feedback and where it aligns, and where they've made some other points. Generally, there's support for an outcome-based planning system, more flexible, less prescriptive planning system. Kaipātiki's gone into a bit more detail, which is something we've not done so much in the submission, because we realize that the Productivity Commission's going to do that when they go into the draft. Upper Harbour Local Board has also made some key points, and not different to what we're saying. They support less complex public engagement, and they also have a point which is something we haven't brought up and might be different to what we're saying, but it's around a consultative process, and how you prioritize who is able to speak or not. So that's just a flavor of what we've got. In terms of the next steps, so finalizing our response to the issues paper, you may be aware that the deadline was actually yesterday, but we've been engaged with the Productivity Commission quite closely. We've had meetings with them, and they are aware that we've got this process first to go through, and that we will be able to provide them with a response following this. We've, as I said, had ongoing engagement with the Productivity Commission, and we are feeding them responses or to any requests that they have around detail or specific examples they may need. And in terms of the overall process, so the draft report will be released in July. We will then respond to that draft report, and then the Productivity Commission will table their final report in November. So the recommendations are expected to shape the work program for the incoming government, and that will probably take another 6 to 18 months following that.
Do you want to add anything, Shane? All good? Happy to take questions?
Absolutely.
Councillor Casey.
You worked with Auckland Transport on this submission.
We did.
Why didn't Watercare join in and have a trifecta?
They wanted, well, yep, they had some very specific points that they wanted to make, and I think there was also an issue around the deadlines. So because it was such a tight time frame, they wanted to do their own. But what we did do was make sure that there was alignment in terms of what we were saying.
That was my next question.
And what they have done is they've even, word for word, used the recommendations we've made around the key aspects of the principles that we think the Productivity Commission needs to think about. We've also both used, this, in some cases, the same examples, and there's clearly alignment across the two.
What were the main differences that Watercare wanted to have an individual?
It was more that they wanted to give a lot of detail around what they do, so what their business is as usual. So there's about a page of what Watercare does and their relationship with council and in general, and there's just a lot more detail specifically around numbers, costings, things like that.
Thank you, Councillor. Other questions? Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. Mine might be a bit too detaily, but when you talk about achieving certainty of outcomes for all parties, ensuring flexibility to respond, and I'm thinking of big master planned projects where you'll have an agreement and then everything keeps changing on the people that are trying to do it, you know, and the little details just hold up, even though there's been an agreed master plan, and that developers have to go through hoops around things like signs, you know, just because, you know, like even to change the colour of the background, you know, and things like this, when you've got a massive master plan, it might have been planned for 15 years, and then just on the delivery, it's constant, oh, we don't want to move, you know, you've got to move this here, you've got to move this there, and we never get delivery, we take so long, and then we get the perception of, you know, not having certainty, not being flexible to achieve best outcomes. So is that something that you will address in here around our processes?
So we haven't gone into a lot of the detail around the processes because one of the things they've asked for is to be thinking about the principles. But what we have said is that essentially the planning gain should be greater than the planning pain, and that that while there needs to be some certainty, there also needs to be flexibility, and that it's a difficult balance, and they need to have a real good think about what that will look like, but it's certainly not an easy fix.
And so also when we have things like, we've got the urban planning, we have a strategy, but then in our consents department, there's another law that says, oh, we have to give people the chance to, they can apply for this, but it's complete, and then they get granted, and it's completely out of scope with what the strategic direction is for a particular area. So it feels like, so in terms of that, you can get often bad urban outcomes. So how is that addressed in here? Because that's part of our process. It's part of how we, you know, you have this and then someone else goes, I want to do something different. So they just apply to us. And I've had these conversations in the consent space, oh, we have to let them. And then, oh, well, it's been granted, and then you've got a mess. And we've had, so all of this work over here has no effect on the actual process and delivery, and then the outcome is poor. So I'm really interested in us looking at that at some stage. I mean, this is really what's happening on the ground.
You go.
I think one of the difficulties that the Productivity Commission is finding is that they're trying to do a blue skies review, and they're trying to look at it almost in a helicopter way, but getting down into the detail is where the rubber hits the road.
Okay, so if we can use some examples when we get the rubber hitting the road, and actual practical examples showing, you know, actually showing where we have huge roadblocks because one part of our system kind of unintentionally is undermining another, and there's nothing purposeful about this, but it's just that we're such a huge machine
Sure, yeah. I think that's,
we're not talking to each other, or we have legislation that says one group has to do this and the other group has to do that, and there's no meeting in the middle. And then the public go, how the hell does this work? You know, so those are the kind of things that I think if we've, you know, going to be credible and actually get good results, we've got to have systems that work together and are flexible. Thank you.
And Councillor Cooper, the Productivity Commission have struggled with problem identification. I think you've just done it in about 3 sentences, so thank you for that. Councillor Webster.
To people who are yes, thank you. A very good submission. The public engagement on page 9. I support the meaningful early decision-making process, which is good, and transparent engagement with communities. But at some stage, should we be saying, and I can think of occasions when we've just got to get on with it and let the developer get on with it. Once it's built, it actually comes right. And I can think of several occasions where, you know, things that we had a lot of public against, but actually once you got it done, they actually came round and thought it wasn't too bad. So have we covered that somewhere? I mean, public engagement and early process is all very well, but there comes a time when actually it's a shut up and let them get on with it situation. Have we covered that in our submission?
Oh, I think on some parts we have, but we can make it a bit more explicit.
I mean, I can give several
So the principle that we're saying is that the engagement should essentially be at the front end of the process.
Yeah, understand
where people
that.
agree on that.
And
we
I
haven't
agree with that,
quite
yeah.
used your words there. People should shut up, but that's essentially what it is saying. Once the decision is made in principle at the front end, then, and it's very much what Councillor Cooper is saying,
yes, it
then the
was.
process should, so that's what we're saying as a principle that is in there, just not exactly your words.
Yeah, okay.
And we need, if we're saying it in here, we need to be prepared to follow it through in our actions, and I guess we need to look at the last couple of weeks when we make a principal decision and then follow it through. That's exactly what we're asking for here.
Yep.
So we need to just understand what it is that we're doing, because we can ask for one thing to the Productivity Commission, and in reality we need to understand what that actually delivers. So, to be clear, happy to ask for that. Okay, Councillor Wood?
Just in relation to structure planning, no, I mean, is it called precinct planning or some other name now? And I can think of, you know, Long Bay, where there was a long process of structure planning to get some idea on what was going to happen up there, even before the council came up with the plan. You know, it wasn't a plan change; it was to set the zoning for what was going to happen up there. And I thought that was a reasonable process, but it took many years to do it. But I do think that kind of structure planning, when you work out what the capacity of the area is going to be, and then look at what the infrastructure is there to handle the needs of that level of development, is important. And I think that was a good example of how it can be done, and you know, meet the needs of the developer. So have we kind of got that in here?
That particular example?
Well, I think Long Bay was the Long Bay development, which is still going on at the moment. But I think, you know, North Shore City probably worked on that zoning development for a few years, and there was a couple of kind of iterations of the structure plan consultation. And I think you know, that was a good example of, you know, the people obviously weren't, you know, endeared with what the council came up with, but they knew that they had had their voices heard before the and then the zoning happened, and I think, you know, in that was more painless because they knew that there'd been a good process behind it.
I think one of the things that we've said is that some planning processes can inherently take a longer time because of the large infrastructure that's involved. So where possible, it should be, you know, as speedy and painless as possible, but it's not always. But a good process isn't necessarily always going to be very short. It may take a bit longer to get it right.
Yeah.
I think is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think it has to, but you have to have that kind of good level of consultation, and a consultation is more than just one discussion with the community and I think on occasions, and we kind of, if you do it properly, you do take the community with you. We were at Bucklands, Beachlands last night, and the people out there are really concerned about the way that area is being planned, and the fact that there's been zoning put in place, hasn't been taken up, and you know, now they're in betwixt and between being fully developed or being developed so they can get good infrastructure in place, and it's in a halfway house at the moment situation, which is, I think, a good example of what they really need to do, because you've got to put that infrastructure in, and especially transport infrastructure is so important for an area out of town like that, which has been going on in its development phase for many years.
Okay. Yep, point
Lots of
taken.
areas around Auckland like that, George.
So we've noted the points that have been made, but on balance, people are reasonably comfortable with the direction of the submission. So is someone happy to move the recommendations? Thank you. Member Taipiri, is there a seconder
I'll second it.
for that? Thank you, Councillor Webster. So taking into account some of the notes, we can tweak those, and I'll put that recommendation. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you for that. Thank you, team. So we move on to item 12, the submission on Residential Tenancies Act. I'll move. Thank you, Councillor, and seconded Councillor Wood. So this is retrospective. So we'll just have to say good work, well done. It's gone. Councillor Darby.
Thank you. Look, this is good work, and probably related to this, there's growing interest in a possible review of the Unit Titles Act. I know it's different, Chair, but I'm just wondering if you could just give me a little bit of wriggle room. What opportunity is there for the council at the early stages of discussion, being led by the member for Auckland Central, the Honourable Nikki Kay, on the Unit Titles Act, a possible review? What opportunity might there be for us to contribute to that at the pointy end rather than be picking it up after a bill is written?
I'm just going to check and see if anyone, sadly we do get brought in at the very late end with the very tight submission time frames that we have. How about we have a look at that, Councillor Darby, and see if there's a way that we can sort of input. Obviously it's of huge relevance to Auckland, so good.
Can I make a suggestion? Maybe we should write to Local Government New Zealand and ask them, because they will be able to get in at probably the pointy end easier than we could.
Okay.
Because I would imagine it's not just Auckland, it could be Queenstown.
I appreciate that, but Auckland has a very different perspective on the Unit Titles Act failings than, because of the denser urbanisation here. I appreciate Local Government New Zealand, but we need to lead this because there's some dismal holes in that legislation.
Good. Point taken between our two senior ELT members here. That will be undertaken. Thank you. All right, I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. So now we're on to the related item. Item 13 is the submission on the Resource Legislation Amendment Bill. Now obviously there's been a lot of interest and discussion on this one. So, welcome team. Apparently, copies of the presentation. Okay, we can start. Copies are being raised over as we speak.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Good morning. Good morning, councillors. Yes, we've just got some copies of the local board feedback that we've received, and that is a couple of minutes away. But in terms of this item, we've workshopped this with the Auckland Development Committee a few weeks ago, and as agreed there, we've worked with a small subgroup of the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Darby and Councillor Cashmore, to produce this submission. And before you, you have the report and the attached table, which is huge, as you're aware, with further thoughts. I don't propose to go further into a presentation, but just perhaps reminding you of the key themes that we've raised through the submission, and that's at page 53 of the agenda report. The first is the coordination of central government wider reform program. This is one part of the Productivity Commission that you heard about just a couple of items before, plus other wider reforms. And it's important that that gets integrated together. The second theme is around greater centralised planning control. So there are a number of provisions where the Minister and central government effectively take over some local decision making, and there are concerns around that. The third theme is around simplification. There are certainly some elements that do simplify process, but in doing so, sometimes it almost makes it more complex. So we've made some comment around that. The fourth matter is around the role of iwi, and there are some provisions, or those provisions that we support in there, in particular the iwi participation agreements. Just noting, we've worked with the IMSB office around this, and we had a hui with mana whenua as well. So we've incorporated those thoughts in the submission. The fifth is around the two new planning processes, the collaborative planning process, which kind of falls out of the Land and Water Forum work that has been happening over the last few years, and the streamlined planning process. And again, for both of those, there may be limited use, but the council has the opportunity to use that collaborative process wherever it wishes. The streamlined planning process, the council needs to request that of the minister, and the minister makes decisions around what that process might look like, the timeframes, and the council will need to work with those. The minister will also get final sign-off and approval of any plan change that goes through that process. And the sixth theme there is costs. That general one, of course, it always imposes costs on council. It's usually very unclear about where those costs lie, and it usually ends up with the ratepayers. So those were the 6 key themes that we've followed through in that submission. Mike and I in particular have then used that table to make what are predominantly technical comments about cross-referencing and various improvements that have been made. But we're happy to answer any questions, and I'm hoping very shortly that we'll be able to table those local board comments, and you may have questions to those as well.
Okay, so why don't we take questions first, then we can go into the local board issues, just while people are collecting their thoughts. We did have a discussion on the local board input, and part of the discussion with the smaller group was to take the areas and note them where there was perhaps other issues raised by local boards, use those as practical local examples of where some of these issues arise, and to include the other issues into the bulk of the submission. So just to be clear on what was planned with those. Councillor Casey.
At the workshop, a few of us expressed our concern about the ministerial takeover of our planning functions, and I don't think, I'm looking at the executive summary, and it's for me it's still not up there that we don't want ministerial fingers coming into our patch and taking over. Absolutely. And it's tucked away in paragraph 17 on our page 7, as a second sentence, and I'd quite like that to be the first sentence. I know why you've done it, that it's taken the form of the the way you've written the submission, but I think that's the key there. Auckland Council opposes provisions that erode local decision-making and provide for ministerial decision-making powers on plans. So I would take that sentence and put that right. That's I think that was unanimous, really. So I don't want it tucked away in there. If you could do that, I'd be very happy.
Cool. Thanks.
Time's taken.
Any other comments?
I guess just also in response to that, we have asked through the resolutions, I think through the Chair and Deputy Chair, if we can make these kinds of changes, and they can just sign that off in the next couple of days. So happy to work with them on that. That would be great.
No, very comfortable with that.
Yeah. Madam Chair, do you want me just to touch on what we've
that
just
would be great.
provided?
Got that in front of us. Thank you.
You can see there is just a cover memo, and we've attached the feedback that we've received thus far on the following pages. In broad terms, there is agreement from the boards on these themes. In particular, as Councillor Casey has raised that issue about ministerial involvement. And I guess as the Deputy Mayor said as well, so we've obviously included all of those agreed points as part of this, our submission here. And we will, because we've just received these in the last couple of days, perhaps again we could work with the Chair and Deputy Chair to just incorporate or deal with any other issues as part of the submission. But we're also happy to answer any questions you might have specifically about what you see before you.
Just to make it a little bit easier for people, Megan, is it possible just to point out, as we look at the local board input, if there are any areas, any kind of standout new issues raised, or anything that fundamentally
So
might
just
not...
on the first page there, you've got a table where we've just identified some areas that are different in some way to what the submission says.
Yep.
So in terms of Devonport Takapuna, for example, the language that we've used in the submission is that we would support increased use of electronic mail and electronic provision of documents. They are saying they're probably slightly less saying that is important, but not in total. There still needs to be some print and other ways of contacting people. So kaipātiki is similar there. And there's some additional words, for example, Upper Harbour around some of the hazardous substances, and perhaps some other changes to legislation that are not part of this bill, but they would like to see to the Auckland Council Act.
Okay, no, that's clear. Councillor Crum?
Actually, this is precisely what I was going to raise, is the electronic management of documents and so on, just noting that it looks like pretty much all the boards have raised that, and how in paragraph 19 in the report we're critical, and rightly so, of additional costs that might come to us as a result, but we don't appear to be, or how definitive are we going to be about where we stand on greater use of electronic means, and you've got, as you've just pointed out, Megan, local boards saying yes, but not all.
Not exclusive.
So where are we going to land on that?
So at the moment, our wording is that we support the greater use of electronic media. I think perhaps if we could look at that, and we may well be able to just say, but not exclusively. So I think it will be easy to actually reframe that to be aligned with the local boards. Again, we can work with the Chair and Deputy Chair around that.
Adopting a realistic approach.
Yes,
yeah.
But we would certainly support greater use than what the legislation allows us to do now. Yeah.
And if I could just add to that, the way that this legislation is framed, it is you can serve people with documents electronically if they have said, this is my electronic address and please serve me that way, which means we don't have to use paper when people say you don't have to. So it removes that obligation, but it doesn't displace the obligation to provide paper. So I think it's actually quite a sensible approach that the bill takes at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
We'll just nuance that a bit more, perhaps. Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions? Councillor Webster
Yeah, just
and
very
councillor-
quickly on that fact, Megan, we may need to sort of put something in that, because a lot of people in the wider Auckland region have speeds worse than dial-up, so, and maybe there should be a recognition of that, but as things improve,
Yeah.
and maybe we should just put that in our submission.
Thank you, that's great.
Okay, thank you, councillor. Councillor Walker.
Yeah, we picked up all the points that the Waiheke Local Board have made.
Through the chair, we've only just received this morning. I haven't even had a chance to have a look at it. So the answer may be no. I'm sorry, I don't know. I'm happy to have a quick look now.
So,
It's unrealistic
councillor,
to
just,
expect
just why we'll
comment
give
on
Megan a
that.
chance to have a quick look. Part of what I was saying before is there may be opportunities to pick up where there's agreement and whether local board feedback adds to what we want to say, but some of these might just stand on their own as local board feedback on this issue. We may not
Specific.
choose to amend our submission accordingly.
And Chair, sorry, just to sort of on that point as well, is that B covers anything in regards to you and the Deputy Chair having the overview, the oversight of, one, our Auckland Council's submission. And as you've rightly put, Chair, as then allows the local board to put in their respective one as well.
Yep.
It just gives us some sort of blocks in there.
Yeah. So I guess the context is our submission, which is the Auckland Council submission, comments from the local board, which may pick up some local examples, and then by way of perhaps if there's one or two areas of disagreement, it's simply appended as Waiheke say this.
Yeah.
I think we just need to be really clear that to make it legible for government, we can't have a whole bunch of, we can't have 22 separate submissions, including council submissions. So we do, in this case, as a national issue and a national piece of consultation, there is a bit of hierarchy here. Okay, Councillor Walker, I'll just go back to Megan to answer Councillor Walker's question and then Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So there are a few issues here that are raised in that table on that first and second page. Firstly, person who might be directly affected needs to be more strongly defined. I think from an officer perspective, we believe that the bill further defines directly affected, and we believe that is enough. But I would probably just need to read their feedback a little bit more to perhaps understand that point. The next one, opposing and deletion of the regulations, that is consistent with our view. So that's exactly what we've said, although they've been particularly specific about a particular part of that regulation, but we have opposed the whole of it. So I don't think there's any misalignment there at all. The last one is in relation to changes to the economic zone, exclusive economic zone Act provisions, and we have not at this stage made any comment around those. We've left that to other parties and nationally that are more involved in that. So there would just be a question about whether we wanted to include that, but at this stage we haven't included any comment about the EEZ changes.
And the issue around hazardous substances and genetically modified organisms that they raised?
So we have said that we believe that the hazardous substances requirements or provisions in the Act should remain because there are still local issues that are important for councils to address. So I believe that is consistent.
Councillor Cooper, then Councillor Quack.
Just Madam Chair, I note in our submission, in some of the local boards' thoughts, so for example, role of iwi in Waiheke number 10 supports the government's iwi-based approach, but we're supporting a relationship-based approach. So are we going to be putting things in that are almost directly opposing to our own submission, or? Or are you proposing that there's some sort of appendix at the back that shows something different, or? Because, I mean, it is confusing, we're one council and then we're sending mixed messages, so how is that going to work, Madam Chair?
Part of the discussion, and I just had a discussion with Member Ngamani prior to the meeting, I think this is probably a really good example of IMSB putting in their own submission in their own right as their own organisation, and some of that may not sit or be congruent with what Auckland Council says, but because the role of iwi is so utterly critical to resource management legislation, I guess that is as it needs to be. So I think
I'm
with
not talking
regard,
about the
no,
IMSB,
I'm coming back to that.
Oh,
So I think with IMSB, that's I think where those issues
They're
get
separate
picked
from
up.
council.
But if local boards have an entirely separate view to the governing body submission on this, what I was saying at the beginning is, unless we wish to change our minds, then that will simply be appended as the view of that board, almost a sort of a minority report, for want of a better word. Councillor Quacks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In relation to the iwi participation agreement, we're opposed to that as set out in the bill, is that correct? Just give me some, opposed to that?
Through the Chair, the submission says that the relationship with iwi and their role and function in an area is critically important, and that the council supports, I guess, requirements, for want of a better word, to include iwi in in policy and policy making roles. What the submission says at this stage is that we believe that this should be based more on relationships rather than codified in law, because sometimes codifying things in law just starts putting straitjackets on things. And so, and while in principle there is complete support for working with iwi and continuing and improving our relationships with iwi, the council does not support codifying this, that in fact it should be based on relationship, and that these agreements should be happening anyway, and that council will do so anyway.
Okay, thanks, Megan, because if it was codified in law, it would give more power to iwi to override what is happening at elected level by council. Is that correct?
No, the provisions in this case is about a council agreeing with each iwi authority about the way in which that iwi authority will engage and have a role in plan making and planning matters.
But it does significantly change the relationship between local government and its community, does it not?
In my view, it doesn't. It is about working with iwi about the best way in which they can engage in these, which we do anyway. And the point of the submission is that we believe that should continue at that relational level, and those agreements should still occur, just not be codified as it's proposed. So in my view, it doesn't change a relationship issue at all.
Can we put it in anyway? To say yes, go ahead.
So I think that your question has been answered, Councillor Quacks, and there certainly will be submitters reading some of the information coming through from other areas that raise some of those concerns quite strongly. I've got Member Taipari and then Member Ngamani.
Kia ora, Madam Chair. I just want to say that it's been pleasing to have the opportunity to work with the officials on the submission, and I understand we're very satisfied in terms of the position that's been put. I don't understand where it's at odds around iwi participation and relationship agreements. I think they come in one and the same. So again, as the Madam Chair points out, the board as a body corporate can lodge its own submission, but certainly our participation as formal members of this committee, we're very supportive of the approach that council's taking, and don't understand where the confusion may be. Again, it's all about inclusion and decision-making, and those statutory requirements already exist through Local Government Act and the RMA. Thank you.
Kia ora. I probably support the taipiri, but probably another couple of contexts. You know, in a broader context, you know, the sky isn't going to fall in as we start to look at some of these changes. I mean, I recall in 2005, the RMA amendments in 2005 and all the fuss kicked up around that in terms of giving iwi upfront involvement in planning. I think, obviously, the world didn't end as a consequence of that, and participation processes have improved and evolved. And I think, as Member Taipiti said, we're comfortable with the approach taken by council, whether people like it or not. There already are statutory requirements in the RMA in relation to iwi and the requirement to engage. This is more about how Auckland Council is going to follow it through, and it sounds like it's pretty much business as usual, in as much as that's how Auckland Council is positively evolving relationships at a practical level.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a really wonderful opportunity to do a bit of a deep dive into where on the implementation of much of the relationships and participation in a post-treaty settlement era. What I'm concerned about is that we do need, I think, to be more specific on what is on page, whereabouts are we, 38. We say there is also a need to identify how Māori are to be resourced to participate in this process. If there is one thing that I think is going to be detrimental to race relations in this country is the way in which central government is offloading costs onto local government, which can then create tensions. And I think that we could be very much more specific in requesting that government address this specifically, that they provide the resourcing for this. If that is the intention, then the resourcing has to be made clearer. And I think the way we've expressed it is careful, but could be ambiguous. And I would like it to be more specific, and I just wonder whether our officers could give us some guidance on how that potentially might be addressed.
All right, can I just ask Councillor Fletcher, where was she referencing those comments?
I'm on the page 38.
Oh, the attachment. Oh, okay.
On attachment, yeah, attachment B. Okay. So there's that's in reference to local authorities to invite iwi to enter into iwi participation arrangements, and on the, if you turn over the page, we have identified the fact that, you know, the costs need to, the costs that will be incurred in that need to be resourced. But I think we should go one step further and request that government should recognise that these are not costs that local government can continue to absorb ad infinitum.
Through Chair, more than happy to say that if that's what the committee wants.
Well, I don't think I've got an elegant turn of phrase to express that, and I'm looking to you to give us some guidance on how that could be expressed more delicately.
I think it is quite elegant actually, but we do also talk around the ability to build capacity and for iwi authorities and in matters of tikanga Māori as well, which is a slightly different issue but related to the iwi participation element. So unless you want me to frame a sentence now, we can just put, we can frame one up as Councillor Fletcher's requested. That's an excellent idea.
This is in no way to be disrespectful of the intention here, but just to flush out perhaps what is increasingly a tension and some of the realities that we have within local government. I wonder, while I have the floor, Madam Chair, if I could just get a little bit more clarification. The clause below that, this is the one that we support with regard relationship with iwi participation legislation, can you just explain to me, it's appropriate that an iwi participation agreement should not limit any relevant provision in any iwi participation legislation or any agreement under that legislation? I just need to understand that.
So what we're saying there is that these new provisions or clauses in the RMA should have no effect on any other legislation that has requirements around iwi involvement or participation or consultation. So it should not limit or have any other effect on anything else out there in the legislation. For example, Local Government Act, which also has requirements around some of this stuff.
From a technical point of view, because this legislation will have come after previous legislation, if that wasn't in there, it could be argued that this has implicitly repealed some of those provisions. And so this provision in the Act is just making it explicitly clear that if the settlement legislation that provides for mechanisms or other legislation like the Local Government Act, this does not override that.
Okay.
I think that's really, really important. So that's belts and braces to make sure that any interpretation to minimise that engagement involvement shouldn't be seen as a loophole in this. That's good to have that clarified. Okay. I think we are clear on what we're doing. Councillor Lee?
Yes, Madam Chair. I'd just like to comment, if I might, because obviously the objective of the amendments of the resource legislation as a package is to free up decision making to enable even quicker exploitation of natural and physical resources. And, you know, a libertarian could argue for that being inherently good if you didn't take into account environmental effects or the reality of the unacceptable level of pollution of our rivers, depletion of marine resources and so on. Leaving that aside, the irony, and probably caused by MMP, is that in order to get this red tape cutting legislation through, deals have to be done in Parliament with a number of parties, including the Maori Party, and the price for that is much more involvement, even more than now, of iwi, Maori, whatever. And there's an irony in that because, as even the council officers have pointed out, having to consult even on the selection of planning commissioners adds more and more red tape to a process designed to reduce it. That's an irony, the idea of having two parallel governments in New Zealand, which is...
Councillor Lee, are you coming towards something that you would like changed, or a question, or some input into what we're doing here? I'm sorry, we have a huge agenda, and speeches are not, we don't...
No speeches.
I don't think this is needed.
No speeches in the debating chamber.
Can you come to a point? That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying it would be useful if you could come to your point, and then we could discuss
Well, you're
it.
holding things up actually as normal. I'll come to the point.
I choose
in
not
terms
to
of
engage.
In terms of the resource, in terms, boys, please. In terms of the Resource Management Act, the present provisions for the involvement of Maori as mana whenua, as landowners or ancestral landowners is already in the Act, and I support it. It should be respected. However, what has happened since the Doug Graham treaty settlement process in Auckland, the idea of tangata whenua, mana whenua, identified ancestral landowner, whether by take, raupatu or whatever, has become blurred and muddled. And so for one part of Auckland, which through tradition and confirmed by jurisprudence in the Maori Land Court, instead of having one mana whenua for a certain area, we've got a team of 19. And that is because a syndicate approach was taken to a treaty settlement, and the council itself has adopted that approach without question, without really focusing on the meaning of the words in the Act, and made things even more bureaucratic than they are already. So I'll make that point. And things will just get worse.
Okay, I think, Member Taipere?
Thank you, Madam
And
Chair.
then we'll move to the recommendation.
I'm not going to enter into that thing, but I just want some clarification around what Councillor Fletcher was seeking. Is actually going to happen and change the submission, because the plan is a council plan, and that's the provisions of resourcing that you're seeking. And so I sort of, with plans and policies, I thought about the resourcing that was being sought from government. And that's why I want some clarification around what's actually been proposed here. Is that, are you going to say that the government should be paying for iwi participation in the developments of policies and plans of council?
Why don't we ask, because I think the point that Councillor Fletcher made was really clear. I think Member Taipere, maybe if Megan could summarise what we might put in here, and then we'll make sure that we're actually understanding each other. Otherwise, I think we could disappear down a very long tunnel.
Because it suggested it was going to be changed.
Megan?
I believe what has been asked is that there is a more generic point around provision of resources to allow iwi to genuinely and wholly participate, and that may be with participation agreements, but it may be the more general, that everything that iwi needs to do around policy making. So there is a sentence that would say that rather than local government having to assist in the funding and resourcing, that central government should play that role in allowing iwi to participate as they are, well, required by legislation, but as we want them to.
So it's kind of expanding a little bit, point 93 on page 17 or page 14 of the submission, which talks about central government's intentions matched with investment to build capacity. I think it's building a little bit on that.
So it's perhaps an extra sentence around and
things.
resourcing.
Okay. Member Ngamane?
Again, I'm not going to entertain the previous speaker's comments either, but I will carry on asking the questions in relation to what Member Taipere has raised. So in that conversation around that, discussions around natural resource redress that come out of settlements, I just want to get it clear in my own head, are in that debate. That happens in that discussion, that eventuates in legislation and a settlement. So costs around that, that's the process where Council and the Crown and iwi have a conversation around costs associated to that. So I wouldn't see that necessarily as part of this. The other thing is like there is already a range of funds available at a national level for iwi to tap into, whether they want to develop iwi environmental plans, across that raft, particularly through the Ministry for the Environment. So, and then kind of just touching on what Member Taipere said, then there are specific plans that are about Auckland Council that require Auckland Council to contribute because there's a statutory requirement to do so. So in terms of ensuring that is incorporated into the plans or reflected. So as long as whatever the wording is, takes note of that and doesn't try and overlap, because then that would become even more ambiguous than it already is.
Yeah. I think that's good.
I think that's helpful, thank you.
Okay, good. I'm going to put the recommendations. We've noted the points that we just need to refine for page 14. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Useful clarification. That was me and Councillor Darby. So we move on to item 14. I'm happy to move the recommendation. Councillor Filipaina. So this is just adopting the framework, which is
for the grants.
machinery. Nothing to add to that? I'll put that recommendation. All those in favour, please say
Aye.
aye. Against? Carried. And item 15. Right.
Chair, I'd like to move, but I've got some amendments that are just coming up. And I think
Excellent.
Councillor would like to second this one and vice versa on the next one.
Okay. So while we get that up, can I just check, Kay and Joseph, you're happy here just to listen, or did you want to speak? Okay. So would you like to do it once we've had the item presented, so you can comment, or would you like to make them comments up front? Whatever works for you. Okay, good. Sorry, Alan, we might just...
Why do we do this? Why is he doing
Alan
it
can
in
stay
the
there, he doesn't
Yeah.
need to go.
It's conditional. Raise the voice.
Thank you.
No, but it says it here.
Sorry, I think it's just probably worthwhile having these comments up front, Madam Chair, if that's all right. So, thank you very much, Madam Chair, members of the governing body, members of the Independent Multi-Statutory Board, and your worship. Can I just start by saying that in the past, when I've addressed the governing body, I've often pointed to the local board input part of the report and said it's kind of lacking something, it doesn't quite reflect the board's discussions or the board's feedback. In this particular instance, I think it's particularly well worded summary, and I think it actually does encapsulate the concerns of the board. So it's great to see that there's been a lot of progress there in drafting that. But first and foremost, I just really want to reiterate those points. The board has had an opportunity to consider this at a workshop. We haven't had an opportunity to consider it in a formal meeting, and I don't think that was the intention at this stage, because we appreciate very much that this is a discussion that, as far as the delegations lie, sits with the governing body and Pānuku. And by and large, we've been really impressed with the speed that Pānuku have been able to sort of put this all together. We know that, and as you all know, because you probably received more than a few letters or copies of the Takapuna Centre Plan and the various different discussions that have gone on in Takapuna up until now. In fact, I pointed to it specifically the last time you hosted the governing body in Takapuna. But we have a number of very recent, very current plans relating to the revitalisation of Takapuna, and we see this as a very critical step heading towards that. So we thank you for giving such priority to Takapuna as a metropolitan centre, and for all the work that Pānuku has sort of committed to this high-level project plan. So I just want to say all of that up front. There are still just a few little concerns, and I think Councillor Wood and Councillor Darby have identified them in the resolution. We accept that it's really important that there are these strategic assets in Takapuna that need to be part of any discussion around redevelopment or growth or plans around those areas. But the wording of the resolutions initially were just a little harsh. Our community will see this as disposal of $25 million worth of assets. So I think certainly by at least including the conditional sort of approval for disposal, that's very important to allay those concerns, and also just to highlight again the importance of bringing our community along with this process and to genuinely engage with them. As I say, these planning instruments that we reference, the Takapuna Centre Plan, the Takapuna Strategic Framework, the Devonport Takapuna Area Plan, those were all engaged on and consulted on, and we run the risk of almost running consultation fatigue. But when we talk about engagement with our community, I think we're talking about something fundamentally different here. We're starting to talk about details, and it's really important, especially on the dreaded issue of car parking, that we bring the community completely along with us. So again, the high-level project plan is extremely well written, and it does identify quite exhaustively at point 9 the extent of engagement that needs to be undertaken. The board has tried to be as proactive with this as possible, and we've established the Greater Takapuna Reference Group to assist with that in a more timely way, but we don't want to see that as substitution of the engagement that needs to go on with the wider community. And maybe as just one other comment around the recommendations, if there was a mind to include a clause recognising that we have established the Greater Takapuna Reference Group, and we do have a seat on that reference group that Councillor Wood has been suggested for to represent the interests of the governing body, maybe we'd be appreciative of some kind of reference to that so that it can be seen as a collaborative approach. But otherwise, I think I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the car parking provisions and the importance of these sites that were acquired by the business association in Takapuna specifically for car parking, and the need to make adequate provision for future numbers, because I think far too many politicians have picked round numbers for parking provision in Takapuna and then profess them as gospel, and I don't want to be one of those. There are some very sensible and realistic projections in the high-level project plan and in the comprehensive car parking management plan for Takapuna, which identify exactly how many car parks we are going to need in the next 30 years. And I just think it's important. I think we all accept that there will be a need for some of that provision, in fact, as much of that provision as possible to be met between the gasometer site and the Anzac Quarter. So you'll notice that I don't call it the Anzac car park anymore, because we see it as being activated to something far greater than just a car park. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and I just want to highlight that we're extremely enthusiastic and wanting to get underway with this.
Great, thank you, Joseph. Kay, did you want to add to that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for the opportunity to speak as well this morning. We appreciate that. Like Joseph, our board was enthusiastic about the opportunity to unlock Northcote, and we're grateful to Panuku for the workshop that we had with them to have a better understanding of what is ahead for us all. We haven't had this before the board as such yet in a formal board meeting, so my comments are my assumptions from the workshop and how things are going. We're very pleased to see that they have actually taken up our offer and opportunity to work closely with the Kaipatiki Community Facilities Trust to enhance the communication and the consultation, in particular in that area. And we do know that the trust has actually been working on such a process now for about 2 years, and we're grateful to see them actually even mentioned in the document, because I think that's a clear sign that they will have an important role with our community to ease this process through. So we're grateful for that. I also am very conscious that there will be great sensitivity around freeholding of land, and though this will be very important to unlock the development in the area, I would, however, like to say that it would be, because it will be so sensitive, that it would be, especially for the business owners in Northcote, we would like to see resolution C and D strengthened a little to ensure that a very robust process is followed, and that the contractual conditions of the development will be binding on any purchaser in agreements. Also, that there will be very good consultation during this whole process, especially with our community that are most affected. In regard to other items in the resolutions as well, you've also got comment on E, F and G. That is service properties owned by council, the library, the Norman King building, the CAB facility and a Cadnis Reserve. That's what that actually refers to. It just gives you numbers and addresses, but they are significant facilities that service this community. And they're not on the disposal list at present. However, if Panuku needs to later consider some change to these properties, we would ask that we be consulted at a very early stage, especially if there is a need to rebuild in any way. Also, we feel that we would like to highlight to the governing body at this stage that Kaipatiki do feel that the Northcote Library will probably need to be extended at the end of this work that is proposed to be done in this area because of the increase in population, because the library serves not only as a library, but it's often a significant community centre also for the people of that area. So we would like to make sure that that is not lost during this process, because it will be very important for us to actually be active in that area if there's going to be major change there. And our only other surprise with the document in particular, apart from a couple of little minor things, was the fact that there was mention of the Sea Path connection and it's flagged as being an Auckland Transport K or B funded project. However, at this stage, we're not aware that we have any board allocation
Probably more
to
NZTA.
help the Sea Path. So we'd just like to make sure that if it's going to happen, so long as you allocate it, we're keen to be involved.
Sorry.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Madam Chair, it might just be worth pointing out that Kay was referring to item 16. I've just seen some confusion. And we're item 15.
No,
so just in case there was some...
I don't think anyone was
No, we do know the
confused. I think
difference.
we're
Okay.
pretty...
We know the difference between tax.
And if they were confused, well, they shouldn't have been because it's pretty clear. So what we'll do is I'll just see if there's any questions, but I don't want us to enter into a whole bunch of... Actually, no, what we'll do is thank you for that. And what we'll do is we'll take the presentation, and then if there are questions that are specific to the local board, then if need be, we can ask some of those questions directly of you. But I'd like us now to do the presentation, and then we can get into questions on the whole issue.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, all. Carl will join me. Madam Chair, the intention is, obviously, there's two items here specifically on the agenda, but we would like, with your indulgence, to do the presentation for both. I think, and then we'd address, obviously, the recommendations, because they're largely consistent between the two, and mostly what is applying to one is going to apply to the other
We'd
as well.
expect to do the whole thing together because the issues, although they are site-specific, the concept and the way we're dealing with this is the same. Thank you.
I think we'll keep this fairly quick, Madam Chair. We have had a workshop, but just possibly for those who weren't there, and just to remind people, there's a basic outline of what we're going to talk about, just to remind this committee around the way in which Panuku classifies projects, what is a high-level project plan, because it is the science that is recently new. We'll talk about Northcote, we'll talk about Takapuna, and then we'll come back to the recommendations for both, Madam Chair. So I'll run through the Northcote side, and Clive will run through the Takapuna side. So just to remind you, I'm sure you remember this, when we did the priority development locations, a number of areas were allocated to various categories within those three: transform, unlock and support outlines. Obviously, the higher level involvement, transform, being a far more custodial and longer term project, and things like Manukau are listed there, and Wynyard Quarter. When we come to the unlock, they are fairly substantial projects, but they're not of the order of transform, but they do involve us enabling and facilitating development in those areas. And then the support category, which is a very busy category, is about numerous properties that this council has allocated to Panuku to realise effectively to best advantage. So those were the categories. Both of these projects fall within the unlock category. The high-level project plans, for want of a better word, are strategic business cases that are seeking to empower and enable Panuku to do what it is mandated to as a CCO. They essentially set out why we're doing what we're doing and what the strategic rationale is and what the issues are. What are we doing in terms of the project, the scope, the purpose and the outcomes, and then how are we going to do this? What are the strategic moves? What are we going to do by way of milestones? What is the proposals around community engagement, framework planning? How do we intend to realise properties, and the funding and approvals that are necessary, of which this committee is one. So that's an outline of the high-level plans. That gives you it in another dimension. I think just to simply say, we are seeking a mandate for Panuku to do what it is empowered to do here, and that's why, unfortunately, the words dispose do appear, because ultimately, whilst these disposals are highly controlled and highly directed at specific outcomes, they are effectively the disposal of property, and we can't walk past that function. So just quickly, Northcote, and I think Kay obviously mentioned, in terms of Northcote and Takapuna for that matter, there's been a large amount of planning going into the area, and effectively what we're looking to do is build on a whole raft of plans that has gone before, some of which have been formally endorsed by the local board. So the intention is obviously that Panuku is the lead agency.
that we will identify and facilitate the development opportunities, and that means disposing of them to the private sector subject to requirements. That we would use the existing plans, that we would engage with the local board, mana whenua, and other stakeholders, as well as the broader community, and we would do that through the local board. That we would engage in framework planning, which is another word for sort of master planning, in the sense that we're looking both spatially and in terms of how we give effect to the spatial desires for that area as a consequence of some of the earlier plans. So it is about implementation in that framework plan. It is about partnering with people like Housing New Zealand and Northcote. Obviously, you have a major landholding there and a number of houses. It is about identifying the opportunities that council property has to effectively realise both the commercial and community outcome for Northcote. So we recognise that within these plans there's a number of community outcomes which we'll go into later, and it's how we do that with a commercial rigour attached to it. And then there's the realisation strategy about how we intend to do this, and then what is our authority and mandate to act in that context. And certainly an empowerment to transact is critical to that process. I won't go too much into this, Madam Chair. These are visions that have sat for years. We have no desire, no intention to change the fundamental aspirations and agreements that have been reached with the community. We are seeking merely to refresh them and to renew them based on the current context. I mean, there's a number of principles that have been set in previous documents. We're looking at, from a framework planning perspective, a wider area of influence than just the commercial centre. So the commercial centre is shown with the sort of red outlines. We've got the broader yellow owned by council. There's significant central government holdings in this form of schools and Housing New Zealand, which is shown in the sort of bluish area, including defence housing to the west of the centre. And we're going as far north as Akaranga Drive, including Hautapitro College, in terms of framework planning. And this is a desire to see the whole community integrated and knitted back into what is their local centre. Again, I don't want to wax too lyrical about Northcote Centre, but it is complicated by perpetual ground leases. I mean, all these properties, with few exceptions, are all leased in perpetuity to a number of ground lessees, and they in themselves have sublet to occupiers of their shops. So council leases the land, they've built the buildings and leased the buildings out. So there is a complication there in terms of our ability to unlock value, both community and commercial, out of the centre. They are perpetually renewable, although they have rent reviews every 7 years. So that complicates the foundation there, and has probably been one of the issues that has held the centre back in a number of ways, not least of which its physical appearance, because of the commercial dynamics. Again, these were outcomes that were listed in an earlier plan. Again, we're not seeking to change them. They are sort of motherhood and upper pass stuff. There's no reason why we would step past those. Effectively, it's going to give effect to them as opposed to concern ourselves about their detail, other than to give effect to that. I think, again, there's a new context for Northcote going forward. One is obviously the establishment of Panuku. The unitary plan gives some upside on the zoning. There's an increasing demand for apartments and a general market uplift. We have a special housing area around there. We have the adjoining elderly villages, which are part of the Housing for Older People initiative. We have substantive agreement in progress with Housing New Zealand as a potential partner. We have a ground rent review in place. We have a wider area of influence, and we have an ability to be more active in the place and property management of the centre. So quickly, Madam Chair and councillors, key strategic moves. We want to revitalise the centre, we want to reconnect it, we want to develop it, and we want to do this in a partnership, both with the people who have a commercial interest in the centre and obviously the wider community who utilise and access that centre on a daily basis. And the plan is quite strong about the way in which that approach will be made. There's a number of budgets, and I take the point Kay made about the CPAth, but there's obviously a number of budgets that exist, and part of the high-level plan is to look to bring coherence to those budgets, no different to the spatial priority approach. That just outlines some of the surrounding projects that are either planned or ongoing, and also potentially available. High-level milestones, Madam Chair, this committee is obviously a critical component. We move into clear engagement and communication plan, and then an implementation plan, both around the way in which we manage the centre and the framework planning, and obviously the development assessment and the feasibility opportunities, together with some of the local leaseholders. So, I mean, there's the substance of the recommendations, Madam Chair, which are not dissimilar to the Takapuna ones. I simply note the point that was made earlier that we recognise that there are effectively commercial holdings there alongside community holdings held by the council, that in terms of framework planning we want to integrate the whole approach, and that our approach to the community facilities is that if we, together with the local board and the community and other stakeholders, can come to a point where we can potentially improve those facilities either by way of services or built outcomes. Kay talked about expanding the library. At this stage there's no budget to do that, but if the outcome of these projects is to deliver some financial rewards to the council that could see some of that money address those shortcomings going forward, well then that's part of the process of identifying those. It's not simply let's get average about the surrounding land. So it's more of a planning exercise and a long-term future exercise. So I'll hand over to Mr. Furr for the Takapuna.
Madam Chair, you happy with me,
Yep.
given that we workshop this, you happy to be very brief?
Yeah, and we can clarify and ask questions.
I think, and I think that the chair of the local board, I think, summed up the issues really, that there's been a whole number of plans, a whole lot of thinking gone into how Takapuna can be developed. We know we have some informed and engaged community interest, business and community interest, with strong opinions and not always the same opinions as to what should happen. And we've got key land in the middle of a metropolitan centre that can potentially unlock and deliver against the objectives of making this a metropolitan centre. So and I think the vision, and this is largely documentation, that this is largely comes from some of the existing North Shore City and local board adopted strategic frameworks. This slide just shows that that the central Takapuna sits within a bigger spatial priority area that includes the hospital precinct, with very considerable budgets it has for developing its precinct, and the Smales Farm area with its office and possibly residential uses, and then some of the Barriers Point area as well. So it's quite a significant area in total within the North Shore context. And I think Takapuna has always really been a commercial centre with a hole in the middle, and the hole's filled up with cars, but the interesting areas, the beach, Hurstmere Road, Shore City, have always been around the edges of the big car park. And I think in some ways the opportunity here around the AOT, around the Anzac Quarter, as Joe I think calls it, is to trying to bring a heart back into Takapuna as well. And I think the high-level project plan goes through some of the key issues, and it really boils down to those key land holdings that the council has around the central car park, the gasometer car park, and probably not to forget, but there's slightly hard to do with the Bruce Mason car park, which is part of the Bruce Mason Theatre and is in RFA ownership, and then some of the beachfront land where there's car parking and disused road that's used for car parking that could be stopped and sold, and various other things like that, things that could be tidied up and improved. So, and I think Joe put his finger on it when he said, really, a lot of this is about how to manage urban renewal in balance with car parking, and that will be the issue that will, as Joe also said, it's in the detail. It'll be how we can work through and finesse to find schemes that get that balance, that meet AT's perceived needs, and the business and the community's needs, and also brings about development that you're going to be pleased with. So, I mean, the slides go through and talk about some of those objectives there to revitalise the town centre, and Joe referred to the parking strategy. AT see this as the utmost important. The getting a firm handle on the car parking needs of central Takapuna and ensuring that bus rapid transport is properly dealt with in the centre are at the hub of making it successful. They're refreshing a lot of that work now to make sure it's caught up with some recent AT board decisions in terms of its approach to off-street car parking. So that's all being refreshed as part of this process as we sort of turn the heat up on it all. So in case you need familiarising, that actually doesn't, that points to the Rose Garden rather than to the car park, but the car park's the pink area and that's the Gasoma site. So the local board have set up a reference group that we want to work closely with. We're working, AT is refreshing its strategic perspective, and we're working through some of the practical property development opportunities associated with those sites, so we can bring all that together in terms of landing some solutions that hopefully everyone will be happy with. And some of the AT work will probably mean we'll be a bit later than June, but certainly we're trying to make progress as fast as we can. So I think, Madam Chair, that's probably, I mean, we're well into that program already, and really that brings us probably back into this report. So that was a bit of a whiz through, but hopefully that.
Thank you. This is good work.
Very good.
It's excellent. So I'm going to hand over to Councillor Darby, and then I've got Councillor Fletcher and Councillor Casey. Councillor Darby.
Thanks, Chair. Chair, would you like to just, even though there's two reports, two items, would you like to just marry them up?
I think I think we can traverse both of them. I think people should be able to hold that in their heads, and it would be really good if you just highlighted your recommendations that you have.
Yes, Chair, and I think I can't help but reflect that it's very recent that we married up two CCOs into this entity to put the urban design expertise of Waterfront Auckland with the property nous of Auckland Council Properties, and here we are. We really are at the pointy end of real business, and I, again, like you, congratulate the team for some exhaustive work, and this has been very well canvassed work with local boards. We got two local boards in strong support. I see there's an email in just now from the Takapuna Beach Business Association. They've obviously seen the report, and they're expressing to all the councillors here and the Mayor support for the direction that's being suggested. Look, I'm not going to go over everything that Clive and Alan and Joe and Kay have uttered in support of this direction. I think it's pretty clear as high level of support. I do want to stress that this high level project plan, respective for Takapuna and Northcote, is actually quite a detailed high level plan for a high level plan. And I just want to draw your attentions to section 9 and 10 of each. 9 for, I think it's 9 for Takapuna and 10 for Northcote. Those sections emphasise the community engagement going forward, and it's important that we acknowledge that this is not a quick knee-jerk reaction in the absence of bringing our community with us. It is being well considered in the stages that will be following this initial decision. The decision to dispose, say, in both of these is highly conditional, and if you scroll up, Madam Chair, you'll see, personally, I don't actually think the word conditionally is required, because I think it's referred to in subject to D and E, and they are the conditions. Clive, do you think we can do without the word conditionally?
Well, it creates a bit of a tautology if you leave it there, because you've got to meet some conditions to sell conditionally, and you never know how you get out of it. So I think it would be better if that was deleted.
I think I've wordsmithed myself to death there, and I think subject to D and E handles it. And then if we go back down, and that reinforces the section 9 for this one, and later on you'll see 10 being referenced for Northcote.
Dictionary along with himself in future.
So I'm extremely comfortable with the direction being taken. Yes, there is a disposal of properties being signalled here, but it's highly conditional, and there's a lot more work to be done in both Northcote and Takapuna. But I've also seen a comment come in last night from the chair of the Kaupatiki Facilities Trust, Jill Nerney, just gushing support for the direction being taken in Northcote. That's not a businesswoman, that's a woman who chairs a trust that is has got its fingers all over the community. It's really well connected, and it's just a delight to see. On one hand, you've got the Business Association in Takapuna emailing us, and I've just got this personal email to my email from the Facilities Trust expressing support. So with those amendments, I'm very comfortable that we can proceed here today.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Darby, and thank you for your work in this area. So you're happy to move that?
Sorry, Madam Chair, I think it's section 9 in both of the plans. You're referring to the community, place-based community engagement. I think it's section 9 in both of them.
I think it's...
So we just need to get our section reference right. We can fix that.
Okay, that's fine, sorry.
Bill?
Beg your pardon? It's a
Okay.
different document.
Well, if you move that, would you like to second, Councillor Wood?
Yeah.
Councillor Wood's happy to second. Now I've got Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Casey, Councillor Webster, Cooper, Memagamani, Crum, Penrose.
Madam Chair, mine are just really questions.
Yep.
While I, in principle, am very supportive of the project outcomes, I'm just looking for some comfort. Very, very mindful that you've tried to establish a reference group. Has that met yet? Can you tell us a little bit more about it? Secondly, has that traversed the issue of the Sunday market, which I know has been very popular in terms of support? And I guess I just want to put my questions in the context of the Kiwi Square. You know, when you are dealing with public space, you just want to be absolutely sure, belts and braces, that you are dealing with it sensitively. So, in principle, very supportive of it, but want the comfort, and it's been reassuring to hear the local board's submission on this, but if you could just reply on the reference group and on the issue of what's going to happen with the Sunday market.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councillor Fletcher, because we're quite excited by the idea of the reference group. So the model essentially follows a similar premise of the City Centre Advisory Board, and what we have on it is a membership of about 17 who represent various different interests, including 3 dedicated representatives on behalf of residents, 1 dedicated from our community trust, then various different sector representatives. It hasn't yet met. The plan is to meet in the next week or so for the first time. And the reason we refer to it as the Greater Takapuna Reference Group is it very much goes to that wider line that Clive was referring to, of including Smales Farm and the hospital precinct. So we've got health sector representatives, education representatives. We do have a specific representative on that reference group for the Sunday markets, recognising how popular it is. But I think Clive has some other ways of trying to accommodate the market, so he's probably in a better place to speak specifically around that. But we're intending that they be part of the conversation right the way through.
Yep. So I think, you know, we just need to make sure that we stay high level. A lot of these issues are actually going to get dealt with through the process. So I think the reassurance that this will be dealt with through the reference group and talked through is probably the right level of conversation.
Madam Chair, it would just be...
Question, Councillor?
It would just be useful for Clive to give us an indication of the weighting. I'm wanting to keep it high level, but just the weighting that consideration will be given.
Look, I think everyone knows that the market is a vital part of the Takapuna fabric, and people enjoy it. It's held on the Anzac Street car park, so it's held on the car park within the quarter. And so by definition, if there's going to be some intensification or building on that site, the market has to be moved somewhere else. So the place making people out of Panuku are working very closely with the market operator, and so everyone knows it's a problem to be solved. So there could be interim uses and there could be permanent relocation. So everyone's putting their mind to the possibilities of the options that exist. So, you know, if you follow the local board's vision, then the car park doesn't exist in the same way. It's not an open car park anymore. It has buildings on it. So where the market goes is one of the challenges of the project.
Okay, so it's in the mix. Councillor Casey.
I've got 2 questions. One relates to the E that's up there. I just wondered if we could add the word community in there, because it looks like the consultation has shrunk to key stakeholders. And if the local board is absolutely right about taking the community with it. The community engagement should stay wide open. So that I presume you'll have community open days and stuff like that. So I don't think it changes the sense of it. It just keeps it open. So
That's what section 9 says, so.
Yeah, it's not in the resolution though.
No, but look, it's okay, but section 9 says that. If you read section 9, the list goes on and on and on.
Okay, no, that point's well made.
And my second question, just related to this, you know the pot of money that's got 3.6 million for parking contributions? Is that a region-wide pot? And who holds it?
Well, it was money collected under previous legislation for car park contributions for shortfalls when development didn't meet their car park requirements in the district plan. So North Shore City Council collected it. It sits within the Finance Directorate, and it can be applied towards the provision of parking in the Takapuna area.
So just to be clear, the 3.6 was collected within the Takapuna area.
That was what my question was.
Yeah,
So it's not for
specifically
regional...
no, we've got different, in former areas within the old North Shore, former North Shore, there are other funds. So Devonport, for example, still has a fund of about $1 million for their car parking fund. These were levied specifically for that purpose in those areas.
So somebody somewhere has a list of all these local funds?
I have a memo that I can send you, but only for our ones.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about other areas, local funds, that might be, other jam jars. Thank you.
I think that issue's been raised at finance quite a lot, and for those of us whose jam jars were raided, there's probably some discussions to be had at some stage. Well done keeping yours, North Shore. Councillor Webster.
Oh yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm hugely supportive of both of these because I hate to say I can remember Northcote when it was farmland. So I've watched these grow over the years, and I'm very happy that the disposal in C happens, and I know that normally comes to my committee, but it makes sense to bring it here to this one because of the work that's gone on. Madam Chair, I do hope we learn by our mistakes, however, because I think it was Clyde that said Takapuna is I'm not quite sure what you said, something about a community built around a car park. And I am concerned that this is fantastic for both these areas, fixing the mistakes of the past, and I'm just very aware that in other areas of Auckland we are creating mistakes that we're going to regret in the future. And if you take Orewa, for example, where right in the middle, the council at one stage owned the Mad Butcher site, which is now being turned into a car park. All the buildings have come down and it's being turned into a car park for the New World supermarket. So we are going to again have a community built around a car park. And, you know, when you look at development that's been allowed now to go ahead and walk with in the last 3 or 4 years, which is again splitting a community. So we're not very good, I think, at looking at the past and fixing our mistakes and not making them again. So it's just a word of caution. I mean, this is fantastic, but are we going to be doing the same in those areas in the future?
Hopefully. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've got three questions. So first, it's really good to see, thank you, Ellen, financial implications in a report, which I was always used to in a previous council, and it's very useful, and it should be in every report. Yep. Even if there isn't one, it's really clear. But what I'm kind of unclear on is, yes, there'll be developer contributions towards these things, and we're putting our own land, but do we know the net ratepayer cost of each development, or is it a sort of a, you know, that we'd have to contribute as ratepayers of Auckland?
Madam Chair, there's no intention to access public funds other than the funds that are identified as being projects that are already approved in the LTP. So all we're looking essentially in both areas is to harness what the council has already budgeted for and to ensure that they bring coherence to whatever the framework plan suggests is the optimum outcome. So there's no sense, certainly in these unlock areas, there's no sense that we'll be seeking public money to undertake activity. I mean, the ultimate objective is to actually release money from some of these sites, if that's at all possible, obviously subject to the requirements, design requirements and things like that.
Okay.
Clearly, there's no intention and desire and no recommendation in this report to seek any additional public funds other than those that are already budgeted for.
Thank you. The other question is, because I'm unclear, like there's a lot of talk about parking, but I thought a metropolitan centre should be going well up, and then you wouldn't need so many cars. We've got new public transport hubs, all sorts of the types of things that you would put in a metropolitan area. So I guess I'm hoping that, you know, masses of land isn't now being looked for and for parking. And also, you know, we've gone to more of a minimum parking or maximum parking rather than minimum parking. So I'm just a bit concerned that there's an awful lot of money spent on bits of land at grade just to put cars on, when we should be looking to have more people accessing other ways of getting to town.
Look, I think, Madam Chair, look, that, I mean, that's absolutely the centre of the whole analysis in Takapuna. So that will be how we say, the more cars you have, the less urban renewal you have. So so it's
Right.
how you get the balance, you know, how you get the balance and look at it in a 21st century perspective and not a 20th century perspective will be the challenge here.
Okay, so in terms of the unitary plan withdrawal last week, are there any effects of that, of the lowering and zoning, that would affect any of this development?
Not to my knowledge. I mean, Takapuna is a metropolitan centre. That's
in scope.
Yes. Yeah,
And
but
it's
some of the
single-resident
changes in zoning withdrawal were in the metropolitan centre, so that's
What about Northcote?
okay. And the same. What about Northcote? Any changes there that would have affected development?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, obviously, I mean, the issue is, it's the same as with Takapuna. Northcote Centre does require parking. I mean, that centre will die without parking from a commercial and community perspective. So we do need to deliver it. I mean, and ultimately, I think what is there, I think the ratio there is about 1 to 30 odd square metres of retail, which is far below what you would normally put into a regional supermarket or Westfield Centre.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Member Ngamane.
Ora, mine's just it's probably more of a technical issue than anything else. It's good to see Pānuku seems to be engaging positively with mana whenua in the context of these matters. I just wanted to refer to the Takapuna high-level project plan, and within on page 20 of that plan, 9.1, it talks about engagement with Māori, and so I'm reading 9.1, and then I'm reading the Māori impact statement that also gives me a bit of an overview of what's been happening, and I'm just noticing there's a little bit of a disjunct between the two. I think within the report it's gone right down to specifics, identifying two iwi specifically, whereas the process you're explaining to me in the Māori impact statement seems a lot broader than that, and I'm not sure, and worded slightly differently than I get from 9.1, and I just wondered, is it any, do you see what I mean? I can be really specific. It's the agenda, in the agenda page 102, and it's page 20 of the high-level project plan.
You've got a different agenda.
I don't know if it explains it, but I think that report is covering both areas. In the actual high-level project plan, you've got more of a focus down into Takapuna. So perhaps the statement in the overview report is slightly more generalised. But I think certainly we're working at a detailed level with specific engagement on both projects.
I think maybe I'll just get to the specific point that I mean is identified in the project plan draft that Te Waka Angamua has pretty much identified that Ngāti Paoa's rohi sits within that area. I'm not aware of Te Waka Angamua having completed any type of rohi plan process. I do understand there's a general local board area of interest for iwi. So I don't know how we've got down to that level of detail, particularly when I know the history of the area and the variant iwi involved in that aren't limited to those two. That's all I'm saying.
I can understand the confusion, Member Namani, and I would just say that in relation to that, that's probably partially a dual remit that was issued by the board, because the Greater Takapuna Reference Group, because of numbers of membership, again, we're wanting someone there to have a representative view for an iwi voice, and there's not the ability for us to have 13 seats there for all the iwi interested, so we wanted someone at that table who's able to be part of those regular discussions, but we don't want that to be seen in substitution of greater mana whenua and matawaka engagement. So what we asked Te Waka Angamua to do is to come up with a way that we can ensure that there is some level of representation, or even not even representation is not the right word, but involvement around the Greater Takapuna Reference Group, and that's where Ngāti Paoa, I think, has sort of come out of the discussion around there being someone there primarily because they also have settlement land that is in and around the area. So I think that was part of the reason why we've asked them to try and identify someone there, but that's not supposed to be seen as in any way undercutting or in substitution of greater mana whenua, marawaka, and regular engagement with iwi generally.
Okay. Do you see what I mean? Because generally, I think that's a completely different issue from a statement being made about who's there and who necessarily isn't by the remission. And one would think that if you're engaging with a number of iwi and the local board or the reference group seek a representative, then that's a discussion for that group of iwi to have to select an appropriate, not necessarily for anybody else to select it for them. So all I'm asking is, and perhaps IMSB staff can assist in the wording, is just to recraft that a little bit more delicately. That's all I'm asking.
That sounds like a plan. Thank you, Member Ngamane. I've got Councillor Crum, Councillor Penrose, Councillor Clow and Councillor Wood, and then hopefully we can wrap this up. We're going to take a 5-minute break at the end of this item and then go on to our next one, aiming to break at about probably 12:45. So, Councillor Crum.
Thanks, Madam Chair. It's great to hear the onslaught of support and to hear, Councillor Darby, your emails flowing in. It makes me, of course, very anticipatory for the Onehunga process, which is in an embryonic stage, but fantastic report writing here and presentation. Just, this might be a little unfair because it's a question about the high-level project plans as a whole, as opposed to specifically Northcote and Takapuna. But just, maybe my colleagues would agree, but perhaps it would be helpful for us to have some common knowledge around the term quick wins. So it's something that we have heard quite repetitively in conjunction with Panuku. And you've got it here in your opening slides. What flesh that out a little bit for us. Is it, do we need a common language around what you mean by quick wins? And is it that the first visible physical entity, that's a quick win? Is it revenue for Panuku? Is that a quick win? How would you describe and give us some common vocab around that?
Thank you. I mean, effectively, it is the sort of first cabs off the rank, and it could be anything from placemaking activity, being more engaged with the community around creating a greater sense of that place and getting the community involved. Could be as simple as that. Could be soft sciences. It could be some early projects that maybe councils already identified, and with a little bit of nudging, they can start earlier on than most. You would appreciate that when we talk about conditionally disposing of properties, there's statutory processes, etc. They're not necessarily an overnight success. So what we're trying to do is build on the objectives of the plan and say, what can we do in the first stages to start gearing ourselves towards giving effect to this plan? And it may be a couple of quick wins that we know we can do. So for argument's sake at Northcote, we know together with the local board and the business association and others, we can get more actively involved in managing the centre and managing the community involvement in the centre directly. So that's something we can do right now, provided we've got the budget to do it, whereas other things in terms of redevelopment could take a year or even longer. So it was just trying to build that momentum, starting with this notion of quick wins. Don't think realising any money is a quick win out of any of these areas when you're dealing with public land.
Okay. Councillor Penrose.
Yeah, Madam Chair, real quick, I just want to acknowledge the good work of the team. I think, I can't recall it was the first bus trip or, I should say, in the last term of the previous council, it was the first term of this council. I can't recall now. We had a number of bus trips, so a few of us went on and studied it extremely well. Both Northcote and Hurstmere Road, and we walked over that site for quite some time. So to get to this point in time, Madam Chair, I think it's a good achievement by all parties concerned. So again, good work, guys. Excellent.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Clove.
Thank you. This is great news, both these projects. I'm totally supportive and we'll be voting accordingly. However, I have a question for both Jim and Dean. And one thing that hasn't come back from the Chief Executive or the executive staff is the land optimisation strategy. So at the moment we have Panuku still with the goal to return to the consolidated fund a considerable amount of money each year, which has been met by land sales, which I'm totally supportive of. But at the same time, we were going to look into that to see how a greater proportion of that money or money realised from land sold in an area is returned to the area, which can / be part of the optimisation as well. So clearly we've got two examples here, and I imagine that's how it will be, and I'm hoping that's how it will be in Avondale as well. But there is no clear policy that's come through, and I'm sure there are many other councillors around here who are not part of the Panuku Spatial Priority Project, on the radar, whether it's Transform, Unlock or whatever support the other one is. So what is the scenario there? Because needless to say, some of us, all of us, would be concerned that those that are on the Panuku radar are perhaps getting a little bit more favourable treatment through optimisation and recycling of the money from the sales in their area. However, those areas that don't have these development intensification projects are possibly getting a bit concerned that land sales and land realisation in their area have been stripped from them and going to the consolidated fund, and that area will never see the money again. Can you clarify those, please, Dean or Jim, both?
Well, first of all, any land optimisation and sales is agreed through here. So there's nothing that's occurring that doesn't come through the political approval process. The second, in terms of the policy or the process around how that capital is reinvested, I'd have to come back to you and just confirm where we're at with that, because honestly, Councillor Clough, I'm not across quite the detail that I think that you're after. Do either of you, have you got anything to add, Alan or Clive?
Certainly I can comment from a Panuku point of view. I mean, we're very mindful that the priority areas that have been identified for Panuku suggest that we do nothing outside of those things. There's no doubt that there are still a number of optimisation projects outside of these areas that are being worked on by Panuku. There's a number of engagements with local boards around certain facilities that are inadequate and the degree to which some sort of realisation can improve either the service level or the built outcome or both. So just to give Councillor Clough the certainty that we are working in other areas of optimisation, and it is a growing effort by Panuku. I mean, obviously there's a resourcing issue here, but there's no doubt that optimisation is still on the radar and a key part of our platform going forward, and we're doing that far beyond these identified locations. And so that continues. And I really just urge local boards to come up with ideas.
So I would really appreciate if something came back, whether it's through the Finance Committee or whatever, because I think we need to clarify that, because needless to say, at some stage we need to make a decision on whether the goal for Panuku to return, what is it, 100 million a year? I'm not quite sure what the figure is, but that may have to be reassessed, and of course that then starts to have an impact on budgets and return generally, and as I say, I'm totally supportive. I think we should be looking at excess and recycling and moving money to other areas, but I think we need to have something backed and discuss this in a little bit more rigour.
So certainly we'll undertake to do it. The only other comment worth making at this stage is that there wasn't intended to be a 100% direct relationship between land optimisation, potential sales of that land, and reinvestment in projects. In part, this was a budget decision made by the committee to help address future debt and revenue issues that you had. So don't assume that because the land is sold that it's directly going to turn up in capital investment in a particular area. But I do know that part of the approach was to involve local boards, because there was a degree to which we're looking to take some of that where we could and see some reinvestment, but not 100% relationship. So we'll come back with a view on that, and we'll come back through the appropriate committee.
Thank you. I think Councillor Clough, it's a really important issue, because it is critical that we understand all of the decisions that we make and how they fit together. And some of this is also made through the statement of intent and the requirements that we've given to Panuku, but they then need to play out in the LTP and in our budget committees. We can't, I guess, the confusion is when we ask for one thing around debt reduction and one thing through the Finance Committee, and then we don't follow through in what we expect from the delivery at Panuku. So I think the conversation that brings all those bits together will be useful. Right, final word to Councillor Wood, and then we'll put the recommendations.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And I think the point that Councillor Clough brings up is important in the context of Takapuna, or as it's known by the other people, businesses there, Tekapuna now, because of the science, technology, number of those kind of businesses that have gravitated to Takapuna. But I think there are, well, firstly, it's been very difficult for Takapuna to make the progress that we have been seeking. And I think the gasometer site is a good example of that, where the previous North Shore Council had that had an agreement with a developer for about the last 6 or 8 years, trying to wrestle with how it can be worked through, and that's now ceased. So Panuku are now in a position where they can start looking at that site again, and I think that'll be if you can make some progress, it'll be fantastic. But I just want to say that Takapuna in my lifetime changed from, I think Devonport was the main centre on the North Shore until the Harbour Bridge opened, or just before the Harbour Bridge, and then Takapuna took over. I think all the car dealers in Auckland came to Takapuna. It was the business centre north of the Harbour Bridge, in the same way that Otahu was the business centre in the south of Auckland. And unfortunately, over years and with the development of Albany, times have changed. And I think one of the big changes was when the courthouse moved from Takapuna to Albany. It was a big thud in the side of the business community in Takapuna, but unfortunately many law firms have now moved out, and it has caused a real downturn in the future of that centre. So people have been wrestling with how it can be developed. There's been many scheme plans done, and unfortunately they haven't kind of got off the ground. There are landowners who are sitting with property especially on Hurstmere Road on the beachfront side, very interested in doing developments, but unfortunately they want to see what the council is going to do as well. And Hurstmere Road is one of those developments, upgrading Hurstmere Road, where unfortunately there's only about $5.5–6 million in the budget, and I think it's about a $12 million project, and doing half the road and then leaving it won't be satisfactory. So I think that there's a lot that can be done, and when you're looking at, as Councillor Clough says, the assets there and how they can be realised to do other things, really great. Takapuna has a very close transport connections to the Auckland city centre, which I think it can be enhanced in the future. The Takapuna bus station probably needs a do-up as well, and I think that's an area that can be looked at. As far as Northcote, I've known Northcote since the same way that Councillor Webster talked about it. When it started off as green fields, I was a foundation pupil at Northcote Intermediate, and they were actually that stage, the Northcote Borough Council were building the Northcote Shopping Centre, and that's kind of grown like topsy. Unfortunately, we're in that situation where the council still owns the land, but the buildings are owned by many individual landowners, which makes it very difficult for development. But, you know, we've talked about redevelopment of the Housing New Zealand properties, Northcote Central, and unfortunately we are all seeking a better future for that area, because unfortunately I think the latest thing is that the school roll at Onipoto Primary is about halved in recent years, but it is an area that has huge potential, and Housing New Zealand are key players in that work. So I think, and also that area is very close to the Auckland city centre as well, and it is served also by good public transport. It's been up and down in relation to the redevelopment of the Housing New Zealand properties. There's been threats to take all the Housing New Zealand properties away and sell the land off. That isn't obviously the case nowadays, but you know, I think we have to have a good community input in both these projects. It's good to see that the Devonport Takapuna has set up their community reference group, which has representatives from all parts of the area that's to be redeveloped, and I think that Northcote will obviously be doing something similar in conjunction with Panuku. So I congratulate the two local boards for the work that they've done in liaising with Panuku and really taking up the initiative that is presented with this opportunity to unlock these two areas. And I also congratulate Panuku for the professional way that they've approached this redevelopment, these redevelopment opportunities. So congratulations, and we'll get on and move forward. Thank you very much.
Okay, that's a good opportunity to put that. I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Right, we'll just take a short adjournment for...
Madam Chair, did we do Northcote as well?
We put the whole lot together.
No, we needed a procedural motion to do that.
I think Councillor Wood was going to move
No, we
Northcote,
don't.
and
We've
I'll
put
second.
both sets of recommendations. If you want to do them, okay, so we've moved
Whatever you've
the
done, if you-
Takapuna, and then we'll move same mover, same seconder, I'm presuming. Oh, other way round.
Change, yeah.
Wood and Derby, we'll put the second one. All those in favour,
And there's
please
some
say
slight,
aye.
if you scroll down, there's a change below, and just picking up Councillor Casey's,
Community.
Yep,
we'll just pick up Councillor Casey's input there too.
even though it's in section 10.
Yeah.
We'll put it, we'll name and community. So I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. That's great. So we'll just take the 5-minute adjournment and be back by, say, 11:45.
How long is the 5-minute break?
It's what we like to call a 5-minute break. It never ends up being 5 minutes.
See you later.
Probably enough time for a break. Break's over.
I think you're right. I think you're right. Go have some fun. Get your juice away from my laptop.
How are we doing?
These laptops.
We're here. I've seen you drop juice
Okay.
before. It's all about us.
Right, thanks everyone. So we'll just, we're on item number 17 and I'll hand over to Penny and John. Right, Penny,
Okay.
John.
Thank you. This really is an update report. It's just to give the committee an update on the implementation of the governing body's resolution that was passed a couple of weeks ago, to indicate how we've addressed removing the out-of-scope zoning changes from both the maps and our evidence. In addition, and Tam does have it available, the Chair has asked us to give a response to an email that was sent out by the Chair of Auckland 2040, and Catherine is here to respond to any questions about that particular aspect.
Thank you. No, we'll just wait, do we? So we'll deal with it in the two bits. So we'll deal with the maps first and then, oh, you can hand that out. Maps first and then we'll go on to the item. Councillor Cashmore.
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. It's not directly related, but is to the maps, and that is inaccuracy in the Pukekohe map about the zoning between the AMP Showgrounds on Station Road. It's been resolved with Andrew Baker and the Franklin Local Board, with council staff Tony Reedy and people this past week, and we just need to officially note that that's going to be corrected in the next few days.
Okay, thank you. Right, John.
Okay.
It's just the zoning.
This is really just to help answer any questions if there are any, but I hadn't intended speaking to this. I think it's fairly straightforward. We've removed the out-of-scope residential changes and put them back to the PAUP as notified. That was the governing body decision. There are some errors and anomalies that we had scope under that decision to retain in the plan as out of scope, but they really are minor slithers of land or things like service lanes where no one had submitted that it should have a change in zoning, but we've kept those errors and anomalies in there. Plans to make sense, but otherwise all of the out-of-scope residential has gone back to the port as notified. As the report mentioned, and as Penny and I mentioned at the governing body meeting, there are some situations where that means that the zoning is actually back to a more intensive zone than in the maps that had gone into the panel in January.
Yep.
And these are just some examples here, but I think you're aware of that possibility. It's not widespread, but it does happen in some places. For example, we had a position previously of a zoning of, say, single house or suburban, and it's gone back to terrace and apartment buildings as a result of the GB decision. But
It's a higher
that's
intensity,
about it,
isn't
really.
it?
Right, well, I'm happy to move these
Oh, sorry,
for
Madam
discussion.
Chair.
Well,
Oh, sorry.
I'm just moving them for discussion.
Oh.
Seconded.
Oh.
Yep. Councillor Webster. So let's ask questions that need to be asked.
Madam Chair, I wonder if we could just have the, just a point of order, just have the recommendations up, because I have made a addition to the recommendation, which is just a minor clarification, which I think would meet the approval of most of the members. Have that up there, Pam.
Is this the one about the Pukekohe?
No.
No?
If we could have that up in red, please, Tam, that would be useful, so that people can see what I'm...
Like, change everything that we had except for what we want.
Oh, I see. So councillor Quacks wants to add to my recommendation that we receive the zoning maps in response to widespread community concerns as a result of the shortcomings with council's governance process. I think, councillor, this is revisiting and relitigating a very long 6-hour debate, and I think it's probably unhelpful.
Madam Chair, I think
councillors, let's just be really clear what we're doing today. We've had the debate, we've had the discussion, the decision was made. the independent hearings panel are now dealing with this. This is not a relitigation. I think it is unhelpful, and, you know, to be fair, the work has been done. We're saying these are the maps that we're now dealing with. This is an explanation of the maps that we're dealing with, and I think it would be good if as a council we simply moved on from there. So council, I don't think this is a helpful addition. I don't think it adds anything, and anyone who has missed the debate or the discussion must, you know, I think can have a look at the film footage in the 6 hours, make it quite clear how we reached the decision we reached.
Respectfully, Madam Chair, speaking to your ruling, I wonder if you could just put it up there, and then councillors can make up their own mind whether they think it's helpful or not.
Councillor, you'll be aware that as chair I do have the right to accept or reject amendments. So, you know, I'm just saying that's my preference. If we wish to put that up there, we can simply vote on it, but I don't think we need to debate it.
Madam Chair, look, maybe we could, I could reword it slightly and have it as B. And then people can decide whether they want to vote on it or not.
Just put it.
Well, councillor, I don't think it is necessary to have a great big debate about it. We can put up the words, we can put the words there, and we can simply vote on it.
No, we'll have it as a B. I'll reword it and we'll have it as a B. No. How would that be?
No, we're saying it needs to be, if it is being accepted, it needs to be an amendment. It doesn't stand on its own as a sensible recommendation at all. So if it's an amendment, well, councillor Quacks is moving an amendment as an addition to this.
Seconded,
Thank you. Okay, so why don't we just put that as an amendment? If that goes through, then it does. If it doesn't, then we just revert to simply the acceptance of the maps as they are.
I read it?
We read it? So,
well, it's not as, so this is the amendment, okay.
Will we be discussing the amendment now?
Well, councillor, I feel that the simple discussion of the amendment is a simple relitigation of a 6-hour debate the other day. The decision was reached. One would hope that as a governing body of substance, we would say a decision was reached at that meeting, whether you agreed or didn't agree with it, the decision was made. It's been acted on, and I think a little bit of dignity is called for. This feels like a relitigation of that, and I personally will not be accepting it.
Oh, you're not, just a question. So we're actually saying that we had shortcomings in our governance. Is that what we want? We want to vote for our own shortcomings in governance. That's what that says to me.
This is councillor Quacks and councillor Fletcher's opinion.
Say that we're not governing properly, okay.
So just on that, okay, councillor Kepp, you raise a good point. What might be useful, if we just all take a deep breath for a moment, which we probably need to do a little bit more of. I think we need to then look at, if this is going to be raised as an amendment, why don't we sit with this for a moment and actually take the legal advice on the memo that was sent to us by 2040, which I think may just clarify some of the concerns. We've got a lot of opinions around the table. I think we need to now start dealing in facts. So, Catherine, I wonder if you could join John and Penny and just clarify the memo so that we can have a little bit more information before we rush to opinion. Thank you.
Fermenting horror.
Taking members briefly through the memorandum here, you'll see that it attempts to comment on matters that were raised in an email received by all councillors and elected members earlier in the week. The primary point in relation to the role of council in the hearings that I want to bring to your attention is really the last paragraph of that section, which indicates that all of the procedural issues are actually currently before the Independent Hearings Panel. So the issues on our role
Madam Chair.
How are we going to-
Madam Chair,
Councillors,
there's a huge amount
can we
of
just,
noise
I'm
coming
sorry.
from over here, and it would be useful if you could just ask them to be quiet so we could hear what
Okay, sorry,
Sanderson's saying.
apologies.
Thank you.
We're also just taking a little bit of advice on, we're trying to deal with in a sensible way your recommendation, councillor, and trying to make some sense of it. I'm going to
Back
lift
chat
it,
won't help.
I'm going to lift it out of recommendation A, so we'll just park that for a moment while we listen to our legal advice. Thank you.
So the procedural matters are before the independent hearings panel, which relates both to the status of our withdrawn evidence and the manner in which our expert witnesses may be required to participate in the hearings process. Just to confirm that this is actually underway as we are sitting here today down in the hearings panel. There are likely to be summonses issued by Housing Corporation New Zealand for the production of our evidence statements, including the parts of the evidence that, pursuant to the governing body resolution, Council says is withdrawn from the independent hearings panel process. So we've got procedural aspects down there. The really important message that I want to give to you in relation to the conduct of our case down in the hearings panel is that every effort has been taken to give the full strength to the resolution that was passed by the governing body, in the sense of, if we're withdrawing evidence and Council's position is not in support of those out-of-scope residential changes, that we are not wanting our witnesses to be put forward on the basis that they could be cross-examined and give an expert opinion, which they will be required to do in accordance with the Code of Conduct, which might result in a position that's different from their expert view being different from the position that Council has taken. So we've taken a very strong approach to ensuring that the will of the governing body through that resolution is carried into the conduct of our case in the hearing. There were significant procedural arguments before the panel on Tuesday before the hearing started, dealing with some of these matters. The panel reserved its decision on those things, and we are still waiting a formal ruling on certain aspects from them. But in the meantime, we're dealing with this foreshadowed application to summons our witnesses. The approach that we've taken has been very carefully considered, and attached to the memorandum you'll see some advice that we've received in relation to that from the people acting for us, Simpson, Grierson and Brookfields. Before I go through other parts of the memorandum, I'll just use this opportunity to comment on the last point on page 2, which is really the necessity to have confidence in the statutory process that the hearings panel currently has carriage of, recognising the point at which elected members will come back into it, and to have some confidence in the robustness of the individuals around that table and how they will be managing both the substantive and the procedural matters before them, and to be conscious of allowing submitters to interact with the panel during the panel process and not have them feeling that there's an open door into this forum, which is not the appropriate forum at this stage for them to be engaging with. In relation to the matters that had been raised around developer capacity, I'm not proposing to say anything much more than it's in the memo here, but the key point being the matters that drove the expert view as reflected in the now withdrawn out-of-scope residential changes were not driven by the capacity considerations in a pure sense. There was a range of important policy considerations that were being sought to be obtained through best planning practice applied in the view of those experts. There is an intention to come back to this group with a detailed briefing, a workshop session on the modelling. There have been some questions around that. So the intention is to have a workshop, as I understand it, in April, which will be able to go into that modelling in detail and be able to deal with any questions that elected members have in relation to that, including in relation to the effect of the spread of intensification across the full region. Just one final comment. In terms of the advice that this group received prior to the governing body resolution, that advice was very clear that the natural justice considerations were matters for the panel and that they would be making determinations in relation to how they managed out-of-scope matters. That advice, you'll see in the advice from Brookfields and Simpson Grierson, they completely agree with that view in relation to those considerations.
Thank you. That's useful. So let's take some questions.
Madam Chair, I just wonder that this would have been helpful if it had been distributed before the 5-minute break, because most of us are just receiving this now, and even with the best speed reading techniques in the world, we need a little bit of time to read and absorb this. This is a most important matter. So I'm wondering if you can give us some guidance as to how you're going to enable us to be able to read this and then discuss and debate and question this.
Well, Councillor, this is the answers in here in response to an email that was sent. We've only just received this, and I've quite rightly asked for it to be distributed. This is not to be debated. We're not required to make a decision on this today. This is
Madam Chair, I'm
just trying to understand and be supportive.
I'm simply asking for something that is dated the 7th of March, why it is that those who are decision makers around the table are not given it till 2 minutes ago. There's a procedural issue here in terms of making sure that we are trying to...
I repeat myself, Councillor, this is not the subject of a decision-making process today. This is a piece of legal advice given in response to an email that was sent to me. It's not, and I'm choosing to share this legal advice with the council, which is, I think, the useful thing to do. This is not a process that we need to decide on today.
Madam Chair, it's very generous of you to share it with us.
Nor
but I'm
does
just
I'd
asking
like
if
to
we have the
finish what I'm
opportunity to
saying.
read it.
Thank you, Councillor. Nor does it impact on the decisions that we're making today. Today, and you will have read the item, I'm sure, is about understanding the revised zoning maps and just simply accepting that these are now the zoning maps that we will be using in the process such as it is. The other issue is, having heard the advice, and now that I've had a chance to do a bit of speed reading myself, particularly on the Brookfield information, I'm going to rule Councillor Quack's and Fletcher's amendment out of order, and I will not be accepting it. I think it's very, very clear that process has been followed. I think this adds nothing useful to the debate nor the discussion. And as Standing Order 1.2.4, I have every right to do so, so I will. So we're back to the discussion questions on the maps, and if need be, questions on the Brookfield advice, but you have time to absorb this and to discuss this at your leisure.
Yeah, Catherine, I'm looking at your second page, the statutory process underway that you were talking about. I mean, this memo that came from 2040, I mean, they are a submitter to the unitary plan. And I mean, if I, as a councillor, have any any submitter come to me on anything, whether it's unitary plan or resource consents or anything, if I'm going to be involved, I usually sort of kick it for touch. I mean, if we got something from the Productivity Commission or Housing New Zealand or Gen Zero or any of those others, or Mrs. Smith down the road to do with the unitary plan, we would have to be really careful how we dealt with that. Would that be right?
That's exactly right, and I think the process that both this committee and the Unitary Plan Committee have adopted has been to largely refuse applications by submitters before the panel for requests to speak at committees, and that's been done on the principled basis that the right forum while this quasi-judicial process is underway is for those submitters to direct their attention at the panel. And for this group to keep its powder for when it's actually required to be a decision maker and not to step into the process prior to that point. And, you know, as we've discussed at the governing body recently, it's very important that fairness across the group of submitters, that they don't feel that there's preferential treatment given to one or another by this body in light of the decision-making role that is yet to come for you in August.
So, Madam Chair, I mean, I know this might sound silly, but we've got an issue in Dairy Flat at the moment with a landfill, and I've been really careful to stay out of it. And so much so that I went to a meeting on Saturday, sort of have your say one, and one of the guys came up and said, well, actually, I can't talk to you because you're going to be making a decision on this at the hearings committee. So, I mean, the public do understand that. So I'm quite disturbed about the way that this group seem to have taken over far more than any other submitters that we've had.
Thank you, Councillor. The critical point in this is understanding where do we make decisions and where does the panel make decisions. The panel makes decisions on the natural justice issue and on the other issues. We will make the final decisions on whether we accept or reject their recommendations. It's as simple as that. And some of this cross process is maybe...
Aren't we, and I think what Catherine's saying, we're putting ourselves at risk here.
Yep. I thought it was important for everyone to actually see the legal information that made it quite clear what our legal advice as a council is. We're being inundated with everyone else's opinion, but we need to understand what our legal advice is for us as an entity and an organisation. Councillor Wood.
Oh, thank you. A question in relation to Mr. Douglas Fairgray's evidence. Now, I see his evidence is dated the 2nd of March. So I don't know what the context of when it went in, but is that the date that he submitted it, was it?
So if we can just put in context what the work of Douglas Fairgrave and Carl is about. It's because the Independent Hearings Panel back this in January 2015 requested an expert group to get together to agree on how to model both theoretical capacity and market feasible capacity under the proposed unitary plan. That group has been working under the chairmanship of David Hill, who originally was an independent person who had been employed by the panel to do that work as a facilitator, mediator. He is now a member of the panel, but continues that role. And they have been having expert discussions about how best do you model theoretical capacity and also market feasible capacity. They were required by the panel to come back with their decisions about how they address certain questions that the panel asked them, I think it was about October last year, and that is the evidence that Douglas's evidence was in response to those questions from the panel. I suppose the issue for us is that you have to read Douglas's evidence in the context of Kyle's evidence, because Kyle is actually the modeller and council's expert witness on that. all of that evidence has actually been lodged and heard by the panel because it was around the capacity model. It wasn't about the rights and wrongs of zoning changes or changes to the provisions, because neither of those two are there for that purpose, which is why we think the best way of doing it is to get them to come along, for a workshop to be held with this committee and local board chairs, and get them to come along and actually explain the conversation and what the model does and doesn't do. But their evidence does not actually impact on our withdrawal of our evidence does not impact on their work, because they were specifically required to do that work for the panel.
But he did say in his evidence that the available residential capacity across Auckland for future development exceeds the demand. And that's what he says, up until 2025, and then I think he takes it up to 2040. So that's rough. That's in a nutshell what he says in that, and he gives the figures as to what the demand is. He says that it's substantially greater than what we were saying it was previously.
So just to remind the committee, Kyle has come and briefed you before on the model, and even at that time, the work that Council's model did showed that in terms of theoretical capacity, it was beyond what was required in the Auckland plan. That has always been the position of Council, so it's not a surprise at all, and you have been advised of that in the past. The area of debate with the expert group was how you actually worked out what is the market viable capacity, and the work of that expert group has been focused on when the changes to the residential provisions that various submitters had asked for were discussed in front of the hearings panel last year and went through mediation. The panel then asked the experts group to go away and run the model based on a range of scenarios that they wanted to test with the residential rules, not the zoning maps, but the residential rules. The evidence that Kyle and Doug are responding to is the results of modelling the changes that the council and other submitters mediated as part of the independent hearings panel on the residential zone provisions. And that's why we've said in the memorandum to the Deputy Mayor, but we also said at the GB meeting, that the spatial application of the zones was not in response to looking for more capacity. Yes, they might, the changes in how you apply the zones might lead to more capacity, but the reason why we recommended changes was based on best planning practices following the principles of the council. Those changes have not been modelled by that expert group yet, and are unlikely to be until the panel gives direction on what they want to see modelled coming out of the zoning hearings.
Okay, I haven't got the figures in front of me at the moment, but I did read them in the evidence of Dr. Fairgray, and he made his assessment without considering the out-of-scope changes that the council had put forward, didn't he?
Yeah,
And I think just hang on a sec, just hang on a sec, exactly. I just think we need to be very, Councillor Wood, just take a second.
Well, I'm just referring to what the Mayor said.
I know,
Yeah.
down the road, the hearings panel is actually hearing this and discussing this. We've got all of these people, 2040 included, Gen Zero, Housing New Zealand, they're all having this debate with the panel at the moment. It's not actually up to us to be debating, discussing and arguing this with the greatest will in the world. We just need to kind of hold on to the process that has been explained to us in this very clear legal memo. We are going to suggest, however, that we have a bit of an update on the whole modelling issue in April. It is complex, and it is really important that people understand it well, but it's not the driving factor behind the decisions that were made. So I'm going to caution us to stay on topic, and we'll move on to Councillor Quack.
Oh no, I've just got a quick question. On page, it's not numbered, the appendix to the Brookfields letter. There's a guy, on number 11, there's Peter Nuns. Is he the same Peter Nuns who had an article on Transport Blog in the last week on the unitary plan? Is he the same person?
So through the chair, Peter is a consultant that has been used to give economic advice in terms of cost-benefit analysis. He's not an employee of council, he's a consultant. I can't comment whether he is the person who made because I didn't read it, but he's not an employee of council, he's a consultant.
Head by council.
Okay, I just think it's, if you're saying don't discuss things, here it looks like a witness of ours is discussing it on Transport Blog. He's the author of the article, so you know, I think we should be looking at that as well.
I think we're trying to bring the edges in. I think there's a lot of discussion by a lot of submitters,
Well,
councillor.
I've just seen it here, and I know that he was talking about it in the last week.
Okay. Yeah. All right. There's a lot of blogs around. I think some of us would rather that we didn't even mention them.
You're saying, Madam
Councillor
Chair, don't
Quacks,
discuss these.
your floor is yours.
Facebook, that's disgusting.
Yeah, it was brought to my attention yesterday, John Penny, that the rezoning that on the Pakuranga Road between the Pakuranga Plaza up to about Lloyd Elsmore Park, which was shown in the notified plan as mixed housing urban, and then went up to the THARB, terrace housing and apartment buildings. And my understanding and the understanding of the chair of the local board was that when the out of scope changes were rescinded, the understanding was that also should have reverted back to mixed housing urban, but it's still shown on the maps as terrace housing and apartments buildings. So I wonder if I could have some clarification on that, please.
We'll just check the map in a second, but from memory, there are some in-scope changes on Pakuranga Highway in that location. So therefore, the governing body decision was not to change anything in respect of in-scope. So they would have been in-scope.
Okay, because those were the changes that were shown, and we were led to believe, or we understood at the discussion at the Unitary Plan Committee, that those were out of scope submissions. It was never clarified that they were in scope. So for clarification for me, and there was quite a widespread discussion at that time. They were certainly discussed as being out of scope, but now we're being told that they were not out of scope, in fact, but in scope. So I just wondered some clarification around that, please.
Okay, so I certainly don't recall any discussions around that stretch of rezoning being out of scope.
Well,
and they would have clearly been mapped as either in or out of scope with either a blue outline or a black outline. Black is in scope, and on the map that I have, there's a significant stretch of in scope terrace and apartment zoning in the Pakuranga Lloyd Elsmore Park area. Well, and that would have been clearly on the maps for Unitary Plan Committee. We can go back and look at those maps. Yeah. But
John, you know, there's some confusion here, because certainly the chair of the local board, Councillor Stewart, and I were all under the impression that that was out of scope. There was quite a bit of discussion about that being out of scope, and I recall when I asked about what submissions were made on that, they said, well, there was one submission made on that particular stretch of Pakuranga Road.
So through the chair, the maps that John is looking at are the maps that were made available to all the councillors that were discussed at the workshop. There's been no changes on it. It clearly shows along the Pakuranga Highway in the area that Councillor Quacks is talking about that it's black. the conversations that we had at the workshop were very much focused, because of Councillor Stewart's questioning, on the Howick end of that stretch of road, where there were some areas that were blue and out of scope, and they have been reverted back to the zoning at that area. But we've made no changes, and it was very clearly made, it was made very clear to everybody at those workshops, and it is shown on the maps, that black means in scope, blue means out of scope. And it doesn't really matter if it was one submitter asking for that change or a whole lot of submitters. If they asked for the changes along there, that would have put it in scope.
Well,
So we have made no change, we have not changed it where it was shown black in the maps that were at before the governing body, because we were not directed to remove in-scope changes.
That's clear.
well, it would have been useful at that stage if there'd been that level of clarity as is now being described.
It was pretty
It was.
clear.
It was.
Councillor,
Called your homework.
we had the series of workshops. We had time set aside where council staff made themselves available for any individuals to meet. The maps were available, and a huge amount of time was spent poring over them. It couldn't have been clearer. Blue, black, and that area was absolutely discussed, I remember it. So, you know, it's gone back to what it was under the notified plan, and we need to move on. Any other speakers on the recommendation? Councillor Filipaina.
Just a question, and this is in relation to bullet point 2 under 7 of our report, the agenda. Can you please tell me, have we got an approximate number of those zonings, those zonings changing as you've outlined in that bullet point? I mean, I don't know whether, look, I don't, just a ballpark figure. I mean, I don't know if there's more than 20, more than 100 or hundreds. Is there any indication as to the areas that have now gone back to the notified version of the PAUP that are now intensified as a result? John?
Through the chair, our mapping GIS staff have been incredibly busy,
Yep,
so
so
unfortunately we couldn't do the
ballpark.
analysis on that. I suspect it's in the hundreds, possibly not the thousands, but it's certainly not single figures, so it's getting into the hundreds of properties in that situation.
In the
The argument
hundreds,
was never
in the
about
hundreds,
that.
thank you.
So,
Yeah, been upzoned now.
Okay,
never about,
all
the
right.
argument was never
that's-
So,
about that.
Councillor
Where were you
Walker?
Thank
last
you,
week?
thank you.
Councillor Walker?
Just got a few issues.
Where were you last week?
And I'm just reading the memorandum first, and I note that it makes the point that the key reasons for the council's planning experts proposing a series of in and out of scope changes was not to address capacity issues, and I'll repeat that, not to address capacity issues. The reason why I raise that is that much of the debate, the discussion, was all around capacity issues, a huge amount of it. So I think there was significant misinformation and disinformation put around the council chamber at the time. The other matter that's mentioned here is the objectives were to reflect best practice planning. And I'll repeat that, best practice planning. Now, the view of a number of councillors around the table, and I was one of them, was that we were actually not adopting best practice planning in not giving many thousands of potentially affected people in the community the opportunity to even participate. So I put a question mark around best practice planning as it is reflected in this advice. I think that there are other advice that we might receive around best practice planning that is not necessarily reflected here. The other matter that I want to raise is around the position of our experts, and it lists a number of witnesses that we will be calling. I don't have an issue with that. It doesn't list the witnesses that I'm assuming we would have otherwise have been calling. It would be useful for us to have a list of those witnesses. But around the witnesses, the issue that concerns me is that I understand that if we put a witness up, that witness has to be quite objective. They're there to give advice to the hearings panel at times that might be at odds with council's own position. And that is always the case. And I'll repeat that, that is always the case. They have to give objective advice. Now, I would have thought that many of those expert witnesses would still be able to give a significant amount of advice that was in support of the council's position around, certainly in scope, and conceivably around some of the out of scope as well, because I would suggest if you look at the planning principles in a number of particular areas, those principles are rather grey. We've got out of scope occurring in locations that...
Councillor Walker, I'm listening, but we're kind of
coming to a
traversing.
point.
No, I'm just saying we've made the decision. We've reverted back to the notified plan. We dealt with the issues that you raised at the meeting 2 Wednesdays ago. This is not our chance to redo that debate.
I am not wanting to redo the debate, but one of the matters at hand here is our position going forward, particularly our position as far as witnesses are concerned, and I'm assuming the directive that is being given to witnesses by officers. And I have a concern, and I'm putting that on the table, that it may well be that those witnesses are still in a position to give advice that supports much of what we want to achieve around in scope, and also
now we've got what
the
you're saying.
out of scope position that a number of councillors
Before we lose the question, can we have a comment on that?
So I'd like to have some response to that.
That's what we're trying to do.
That was, of course, the matter that took some time for all of the individual expert witnesses to work through, taking into account what was the consequence of the governing body resolution on their expert opinion in its entirety as set out in their brief of evidence that related to zoning, including business, residential, rural, and related matters. The Brookfield's advice, and I'll take you through this slowly because, as Councillor Fletcher has pointed out, you may not have had time to read and absorb it. At paragraph 5 of that memorandum, it's what occurred was a complete review by each of the council's expert planning witnesses in order to determine whether they could continue to support their evidence in its amended form. Now, that amended form is if you take out any of their evidence about the out-of-scope proposed changes. Paragraph 6, the advice is, with very few exceptions, the council's planning witnesses have indicated that they cannot support the amended evidence, so that is the balance of their evidence, given that their opinions were formed with reference to rezoning proposals that are considered appropriate, be they in scope or out of scope, and that it was not possible for them to sever one part of their evidence from the other. So in that regard, and moving away from the text of the memorandum here, what that meant as an independent expert, they were not able to put their hand on their heart and say that in accordance with the Code of Conduct to the panel that the balance of the evidence was their expert opinion. Now that would be the case whether they were employees or not, so they were required to do that in accordance with the Code of Conduct. As a consequence of that, the legal team leading this, the approach that we've taken only for the purpose of maintaining the integrity of the position that council articulated in its evidence, in its resolution, is to not call those witnesses. We are not putting those witnesses before the panel. We are currently having an issue as to whether other parties are going to follow a procedure which would, a formal procedure by way of summons that would require them to attend. That is, as I said earlier, playing out before the panel at the moment. But it was a very considered approach. It was not, it was taken balancing all of the requirements under the Expert Code of Conduct with the intent of the governing body resolution. It has been undertaken entirely to protect what this governing body voted for.
Thank you. Thanks, Catherine. That's really clear. Member Taipiri.
Kia ora, Madam Chair. Just to get some clarification. Both these matters, can they be put separate, please? And A by division, on the basis that the board supported the unitary plan committee's decision. We weren't privy to the governing body's decision. And we still support the decision we made, and even more information says we did the right thing today, and therefore we find it difficult to be able to support receiving the revised maps, which is contrary to our decision. So I'm clearly indicating that we intend to vote against A, but we want it separate and by division, please.
I move we put the motion, Madam Chair.
Okay,
Can I
you've
ask-
got a seconder for that? Is there a seconder that the motion be put?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll just vote on
By
that.
division?
Oh, okay, by division that the motion be put. Just by, it was
Penrose.
Cooper and Penrose.
And it happened last time.
Okay. Your Worship,
No.
Councillor Casey,
No.
Councillor Cashmore,
No.
Councillor Clive,
No.
Councillor Cooper,
Yes.
Councillor Darby,
No.
Councillor Filipina,
Aye.
Councillor Fletcher,
No.
Councillor Crum,
No.
Councillor Lee,
No.
Member Namani,
Yes.
Councillor Penrose,
Yes.
Councillor Quacks, Councillor Member Taupari,
Aye.
Councillor John Walker,
No.
Councillor Wayne Walker,
No.
Councillor Watson,
No.
Councillor Webster,
She said yes.
You said yes.
In a very lovely voice, by the way.
Councillor Wood,
No.
Deputy Mayor Hulse.
No. Good try.
Just lost.
Okay, so I think we've got just councillor Lee to speak.
Just
Councillor Lee?
briefly, Madam Chair, I thank the officers, and I have no doubt that the council staff are scrupulously adhering to democratic principles. I have no issue with that at all. In regard to the memorandum which popped up, I take, and signed by the Chief Executive, I take it, and I note that the available development capacity, not the driver of the outer scope zoning proposals, and the argument in there, I'm interested in that. But what I'm concerned about is the reference to reflect best practice planning, which, good, we would all agree with that. But then in the same sentence, there's wording would suggest that we're talking about a value proposition, almost polemics, rather than best practice planning. Best practice planning would refer to a comprehensive urban plan. It would refer to not choice and vitality and those sort of value-laden words, but would talk about the capacity of our sewerage reticulation and the availability of comprehensive traffic planning, and the availability of recreation land and schooling into the future. But in effect, the upzoning compromised certainly recreation land by upzoning and commodifying what were parks or school parks. So I just would pick up the Chief Executive and obviously there'll be several people putting this together, that let's hear more about best practice planning and infrastructure and the stuff that urban planning is about, and less about jargon about market choice and free market and housing supply. That's not the central core of planning, of good practice planning at all. That's political jargon.
I'm going to put the recommendations as they are.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yep.
Can I just clarify, was there a call earlier for us to get the numbers, and you'd mentioned, Mr. Durban, about how your team is quite busy around the numbers of those who have been upzoned as a result of last week's decision? Because was that an official, can I clarify, was that an official call by Councillor Whinapaina for that? Because
sorry.
I would see that as something that would be adding significantly to staff time, and in line with us needing to be remaining open, why would we require such information?
Can I just then clarify one? There's been no request for our officers to do any work. My clarification was on, if you were listening, my clarification was on bullet point 2 under number 7. That's my clarification, where it is stated under there that some of the areas, as a result of the recommendations that were passed 2 weeks ago, that some areas, as a result, have been intensified because we've gone back to the notified version. So I wanted to find out, as a result, around the possible numbers of those residential zones that have now gone and been upzoned, because the information that because their downzoning was based on out of scope. So that's why there's been no request at all. So I haven't made the request, but it's just including the numbers.
Thank you. Picking up on the inference that those of us who voted to rescind out of scope last week were doing so purely on the basis of our concern around upzoning, when we've been very clear that it's our concern around process. And my last comment that I would make is, I think, to point out the irony for us all today on page 13 of our agenda, which is not in this agenda item, it's back in the very first agenda item of today, where we have a reports pending list, and on there in 1.4 is what we're doing for the unitary plan in this committee, where it says that major decisions considered by ADC for the unitary plan and others by the unitary plan committee, and that is exactly where we went wrong in the first place. The major decisions last week should have been made by this committee.
I think,
Okay.
I just want to clarify, sorry,
Okay,
Chair.
we're doing it, just hang on, can
Yeah,
I just bring back a little bit of order to this? I think when Councillor Whinapaina, I know you're wanting a bit of a correction. Can we just finish this discussion, and we might just give a signal about where to from here with the unitary plan and ADC? So let's just take a moment. I've got...
She should look at the forward program for the ADC.
I know, we're just, let's just bring this to a conclusion. We're going to round the houses again a little bit by the look of it, but Councillor Cashmore, you haven't spoken, so we'll hear from you, and then I think we'll bring this to an end. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So Penny and John, the moment we are going through the process as set down by statute and as refined by the Independent Hearings Panel, correct? Okay, and the densities are a matter of opinion. Different witnesses are giving different opinions about that, and the hearings panel will decide on what they think is the most accurate density, and we're working what is theoretical, what is probable, and what is likely as far as that is an actual number that's deliverable. And then they will hear evidence, and they can subpoena witnesses, as the judge has quite clearly said to us, to help inform their decision making. And our sole role now is to wait until mid-year, after the discussions and deliberations have taken place, for our final decision-making process. Yep. Now, sum it up.
So, yes, that's largely the process going forward. The only slight correction is that, as has been indicated in the memorandum that have been tabled and in the advice from Brookfields and Simpson Grierson, our legal counsel will play a role in the hearings to put the governing body's position to the hearings panel, and where we have witnesses who were not involved with any of the out of scope changes, and those are largely experts in ecology and soils and things, they will present their expert evidence to the hearings panel when the time comes around those subjects.
But the judge can subpoena.
I think the word is summons, so
Summons, yeah,
yes,
okay.
so.
Summons whoever they like.
And other parties involved in the hearings process can request of the panel to summons people as well.
We do.
Thank you.
Can I just underline the point made earlier by legal counsel, however, should those staff members be subpoenaed or summoned, they will then need to give evidence in their capacity as experts. So they will and could probably be giving evidence to support the position that council no longer takes. And as elected members, we need to be really aware of that, because I do not want our staff to be put in a position of being condemned either in the media or by us as elected members for giving evidence to the panel in their role as experts, which will support best planning principles as perceived and as put forward by some of those out-of-scope changes that elected members have chosen not to agree with. So let's be very clear about that.
I think we should be,
Can we
everyone
move
involved
on?
should be very careful about that as well.
And that's why we have legal advice. Councillor Wayne Walker and then Councillor Fletcher.
Yeah, just a very quick question. Just as far as the memorandum is concerned, it only goes up to page 10. No doubt there's more of it. I'm assuming the balance doesn't relate to the item that we're considering?
That's correct.
Okay, Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is to Catherine. Catherine, thank you for the input that you've given to the committee here today. And I just want to better understand your response. I'm understanding that you are conveying to us that the intent of officers is to give effect to the governing body resolution. So you're trying to provide the best possible advice to us in terms of accepting that decision.
That's right, and that's been in close coordination with our external legal counsel who are working for us in relation to this series of hearings.
So this isn't, in terms of the motion that we have up there, this is not just a knee-jerk reaction, this is a considered response to give proper effect to that decision of the governing body. So my question is going to be in and around what confusion exists in the public's mind as to why that decision was taken, and the weighting that may sit on comments that are made outside of the governing body and potentially outside of the Auckland Development Committee by those who are delegated or deputised to speak on behalf of these issues. The support that I might have shown for Councillor Quack's proposed amendment was on the basis that there is confusion out there. Some of the public see this as, oh, this is just a response to the revolt by the eastern suburbs, vis-a-vis those who may have chosen to vote at the governing body because of deep concerns in and around process. So I just want you to help me understand the importance of a resolution as a resolution. The background to the decision that is taken is not one that any weighting will be put on, it's just giving effect to that actual resolution.
That's right, it's giving effect to that resolution, and the original resolution of the governing body was that in the interests of upholding the principle of natural justice and procedural fairness, withdraw that part of its evidence relating to out-of-scope zoning changes other than minor changes correcting errors and anomalies. So the issue that you've been talking about was actually addressed at the time of the governing body resolution.
So really what Councillor Quacks was really trying to do was to just restate the purpose, and I think that's important that we actually understand that today, and especially for those members of the Independent Maori Statutory Board who are not members of the governing body and therefore were not present at that meeting, and in giving them some understanding of the position of the members of the governing body when they by majority took this decision.
going to put the recommendations, would you like us to do A?
And by division,
then
Madam Chair.
By division, absolutely. Just while we move to that, you've made your point very clear, Member Taipiri, and I'm sure for Councillor Webster and myself, we'd like to be in the same position, given the background, but we move on. So, by division.
Your Worship,
Aye.
Councillor Casey,
Yes.
Cashmore,
Yes.
Councillor Clow,
Yes.
Councillor Cooper,
Yes.
Councillor Darby,
4.
Councillor Philippina,
For.
Councillor Fletcher,
Yes.
Councillor Crum,
For.
Councillor Lee,
Aye.
Member Namani,
Cole.
No.
Councillor Penrose,
Yes.
Councillor Quacks,
Yes.
Member Taipari,
No.
Councillor John Walker,
Yes.
Councillor Wayne Walker,
Yes.
Councillor Watson,
Yes.
Councillor Webster,
Yes.
Councillor Wood,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Hulse,
Aye.
is carried.
Great. Okay. We'll just put B. I think we can just do that on voices. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Against? Carried. And just to finish off that conversation with Councillor Philippina, do you want to just take a moment to explain where to from here?
Yeah, I mean, all the decisions from the unitary plan now have been, and the evidence has been tabled as of the 26th of January. So the ADC will now be waiting for the hearings process to finish. Between April and the 22nd of July, there will be deliberations from the Auckland Unitary Plan Independent Hearings Panel. The decisions, the recommendations from them will come back to the to Council through the ADC, and then there'll be 2 days of workshops. In between the deliberations, there will be opportunity for workshops if required. There are some other legal aspects around the statute that was changed last year around early tranches coming through. So, nutshell, 22nd of July, recommendations, ADC committee, workshop days, and then after that, governing body meeting to then put the recommendations that we will decide on.
Thank you, Councillor Philippina. Thank you for that. Right, just before we break, we'll just deal with the moving into competence. I'm happy to move that.
Seconded.
I'm happy to second it. Member Taipiri. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Against? Carried. We'll deal with and accept the confidential reports. We'll do that at the end. I mean, we'll do that after the break. So it's now just after 10 to 1. Why don't we start at 1, Mr Mayor, between the Mayor and Dean and Jim. There's a few issues to update us on. We'll start that at 1 and we'll reconvene at 1:30.
Very good.
Okay, cool.